Chapter 1455. In the guest room that the mermaid clan had arranged for Lu Yi, he sat quietly and activated the power of the talent tree to deduce the concealment spirit tattoos. During this period of time when he was helping the Constellation Hall to weed, he was also multitasking to deduce the spirit tattoos. This took a long time, so the sooner he started, the better. The ghost tattoos that he observed from Ghost Spirit had a great effect on this deduction. In the process of deduction, all kinds of strange ideas kept flashing in his mind, changing the arrangement and structure of some of the yin and yang elements in the concealment spirit tattoos. The progress was quite smooth, and Lu Yi estimated that this deduction might not take as long as half a year. This made him more interested in the aura concealing ghost tattoos on Ghost Spirit. It was a pity that he didn't see it last time, and he wouldn't have a chance in the future. There was a knock on the door. Lu Yi looked up and activated his divine thought. He sensed Bai Lu's aura outside and said, "Come in." The door was opened, and Bai Lu walked in with a tray in her hand, her fishtail swaying. She raised it a little high so Lu Yi couldn't see what was on the tray. He asked curiously, "What's the matter?" Bai Lu smiled and explained, "The elders said that if you humans have guests, you will usually hold a welcome dinner for them, so they asked me to come over and make it up to you." Saying so, she placed the tray in her hand on the table. Only then did Lu Yi see clearly that the tray was filled with slices of jade white meat. She didn't know what kind of star beast it was, but there was also a wine pot and 2 wine cups. Lu Yi was a little curious. In such an environment, star beast meat was easy to get, so how did the mermaid clan make wine? There didn't seem to be any conditions for making wine here. He stood up and walked to the table. He picked up the wine pot, opened it and sniffed it. Sure enough, there was a strong fragrance of wine. Under the influence of third senior brother Li Baxian and Pu Ku, he also occasionally drank wine. Just by smelling the wine he knew that it was good wine. Bai Lu had already introduced the origin of the meat to Lu Yi. It really came from a star beast that lived under the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Bai Lu said that it was a star beast called Jade Shark. Lu Yi had never seen it before, but according to Bai Lu, it was extremely rare even in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Its meat was very tender and sweet, a rare delicacy. As for this wine pot, it was personally brewed by the previous queen. It had been kept for many years in the mermaid clan, and it was not used easily. After the introduction, Bai Lu gestured, "Try it?" Lu Yi took a deep look at her, then sat down expressionlessly. She reached out and picked up a piece of meat, then placed it in her mouth and chewed carefully. Sure enough, it was as Bai Lu had said, the meat was tender and sweet. What was rare was that this thing contained an extremely pure and enormous amount of energy. Like Bai Ling, it belonged to the kind of meat that not only had great edible value, it could also be used to refine pills. If it was placed outside, it would definitely be fought over by cultivators, and its value would definitely be greater than Bai Ling's. He immersed his consciousness into his talent tree, but there was no movement at all. There was nothing wrong with the meat. Bai Lu poured the wine and placed a cup in front of Lu Yi. She also poured a cup for herself. Looking at the wine in the cup, a look of reminiscence flashed across her eyes. She seemed to be a little sad. Lu Yi remembered that she said that the wine was personally brewed by the previous queen. Since Bai Lu was a princess, then the previous queen must be her mother. He faintly guessed that the reason Bai Lu was sad was probably because she thought of her mother. Bai Lu raised the wine cup in her hand and looked at Lu Yi with a smile. "Li Tai Bai, thank you for coming. Even more, thank you for the help you provided to my clan." Lu Yi said indifferently, "That was just an exchange." Bai Lu insisted, "Even so, if it weren't for your help, we wouldn't have been able to defeat the enemy so easily. More of our clansmen would have died." Saying this, she finished the wine in the cup. Lu Yi lowered his eyes slightly and looked at the wine cup in front of him. He also picked it up and drank it. There was still nothing wrong with the talent tree. Was he thinking too much? But Bai Lu obviously didn't seem right this time. Although she concealed the unnaturalness of her expression very well, it couldn't escape Lu Ye's observation. Moreover, she didn't dare to look at his eyes at all, as if she was avoiding something. Eating a piece of meat and drinking a mouthful of wine, Bai Lu was a lively person. At this moment, she also opened her mouth and chatted with Lu Yi. But what made Lu Yi feel a little speechless was that after a few cups of wine, Bai Lu's small face turned red, and her eyes were obviously a little hazy and drunk. She, a late-stage constellation cultivator, was actually drunk. This was simply a strange story. But considering that this wine was brewed by her mother, it wasn't difficult to understand that she was reluctant to use her power to dissolve the alcohol. Suddenly Bai Lu said, "I want to sing." Lu Yi nodded. "I'm all ears." She sang as she spoke, and a mellow and melodious voice came out from Bai Lu's mouth. It wasn't thought resonance, and Bai Lu used the merfolk language, so Lu Yi naturally couldn't understand. But Lu Yi felt an extremely strong sense of nostalgia from the song. As she sang, Bai Lu's eyes reddened, and tears streamed down her face. Lu Yi didn't disturb her and just listened quietly. But gradually, Lu Yi noticed that something was wrong because the song, which was originally full of nostalgia, had at some point become weeping and complaining, as if a woman living alone in her boudoir was pouring out her longing for her lover. The song didn't have any decadent sound, and was still so mellow and gentle. Lu Yi, on the other hand, felt a restlessness in her body that was itching to give it a try, and a nameless fire rose in her lower abdomen. Every time the song rose and fell, it was like a basin of oil was poured on this fire. He had been paying attention to the talent tree's movements, but until now the talent tree hadn't reacted at all. He was secretly surprised. The song of the merfolk was really mysterious, and even the talent tree couldn't restrain it. But then again, the talent tree could only restrain things that invaded his body and were harmful to him. The song was invisible, so the talent tree really couldn't restrain it. Bai Lu's eyes were still slightly red, but it was obvious that there was no longer the sadness and nostalgia from before. Instead, there was a hint of charm. Her singing continued, and her eyes stared straight at Lu Yi, the charm in her eyes almost condensing into water. Not only that, but her body also exuded a strange fragrance. That fragrance entered Lu Ye's nose, increasing the reaction of the nameless fire in his lower abdomen. Although Lu Yi wasn't a saint among men, and he would still take a second look at beautiful women when he saw them, especially those with strong capital, he was still a man with extraordinary willpower. But at this moment he faintly felt that he couldn't resist. A soft, boneless little hand suddenly climbed up his neck. It was Bai Lu who had leaned over at some point, nestling her head against his chest. Her other hand was wrapped around his neck, and her fishtail was entwined around him, rubbing against him restlessly. The scales on her fishtail seemed to have a life of their own, gently trembling. Lu Ye's nose was filled with a delicate fragrance, and Bai Lu's hair tickled his face, nose and heart. He suddenly raised his hand, and with his fingers like a knife, he fiercely chopped Bai Lu's slender neck. Bai Lu seemed to have been struck by lightning, and her gentle singing disappeared. Dizzily she raised her head to look at Lu Yi and then fell asleep on him. With a bang, the door was knocked open and a slender figure instantly rushed in. It was the great elder of the merfolk clan Yan Miao. Looking up, she was dumbfounded for a moment, because the scene in front of her was completely different from what she had expected. Lu Yi was still sitting in front of the table. He grabbed the wine cup in front of him and slowly took a sip, staring coldly at Yan Miao who had barged in. Yan Miao was clearly a Yu Yao, but under the gaze of Lu Yi who was a constellation, Yan Miao inexplicably felt a little nervous. She secretly thought that she really couldn't do anything against her conscience. She hurriedly said, "Young friend, my clan has no ill intentions towards you." "I know." Lu Yi put down the wine cup. Although he didn't know why the merfolk clan was doing this, he could still sense whether or not they had any ill intentions. If he hadn't resisted just now, the one who would have suffered a loss wouldn't have been him. Back in Fengsuan Mountain of the dwarf clan, he really couldn't resist Su Yuqing. After all, she was a sunshine and she could do whatever she wanted with him. But here, as long as he could maintain a trace of clarity, he wouldn't let her have her way. It was very likely that the merfolk clan was doing this to win him over, but the price they had to pay was a little high. As for why they wanted to win him over, Lu Yi guessed that it was related to some of the abilities he had displayed before, or perhaps there were other reasons he didn't know. Miao Yen opened her mouth as if wanting to explain something, but in the end she sighed and said, "Sorry." In the end, the merfolk clan had done something wrong, and they had to admit their mistakes. But then again, it was rare for them to be able to maintain their rationality under Bai Lu's singing. Miao Yen originally persuaded Bai Lu to use this method to deal with Lu Yi, so she felt a little guilty towards Bai Lu, but now it seemed that Bai Lu had missed something. She stepped forward and carried the unconscious Bai Lu over from Lu Yi. Then she turned around and walked towards the door. Lu Ye's voice came from behind her, "Arrange the transaction as soon as possible." "I'll be right there." Miao Yen paused for a moment and said, then quickly left. After leaving the guest room, Miao Yen didn't walk far before sighing, "I've made you suffer." Bai Lu, who was in her arms and should have been unconscious, slowly opened her eyes and slowly shook her head, her face red. She didn't suffer, but it was a little embarrassing. For better or worse, she was a late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator and a member of the merfolk clan, so how could she be so easily knocked out by Lu Ye's palm strike? She just reacted quickly and pretended to be unconscious. Lu Yi actually felt it too, but since she was pretending to be unconscious to avoid embarrassment, she couldn't expose her. That would really be awkward. Miao Yen put Bai Lu down and said, "Go back and rest." Bai Lu nodded and quickly left. Miao Yen sighed softly as she watched her leave. This method didn't work, which was both a good and bad thing. However, Miao Yen wasn't in a hurry. Since Li Taibai had come to the temple, it wouldn't be easy for him to leave. There would be plenty of opportunities in the future, so she wasn't in a hurry. Moreover, in this Wanxiangxi, the only intelligent race he could come into contact with was the Merfolk clan, so no matter what, he was set on becoming the son-in-law of the Merfolk clan. Chapter 1456. Yen Miao didn't make Lu Yi wait too long this time, returning in less than half an hour. She looked at Lu Yi with a somewhat reproachful expression and said faintly, "Little friend, do you know that you missed out on a good thing this time?" "What good thing?" Lu Yi asked. Yen Miao replied, "My mermaid race is an extremely rare race even in the entire starry sky, but those large races covet us not only because we are rare, but also because our race has some unique abilities." Lu Yi nodded. "I've experienced the singing of your race, it is indeed wondrous." So far, this was the first time he had felt something he shouldn't have, but even his talent tree couldn't restrain it. Yen Miao chuckled, "If that's all, then it's fine. Is there another reason?" "Naturally. I'd like to hear the details." Yen Miao said, "If a creature from a foreign race marries a pure woman of my mermaid race, then it is possible to obtain a unique secret technique." Lu Yi was stunned. He didn't know about this. His understanding of the mermaid race was based on the records he read in the dwarf race's Rest Abyss Pavilion. There was no record of this, so he couldn't help but be curious. What secret technique? Yen Miao shook her head. "It's hard to say. All kinds of secret techniques can be born and there are no rules to speak of. However, there are records in the ancient books of my race that a human once obtained a kind of eye technique from my race. When this eye technique is activated, it can illuminate all directions and kill without leaving a trace. It is extremely strange and powerful." Lu Yi thought for a moment. If such a eye technique really existed, then it was indeed powerful. "Do you regret it?" Yen Miao looked at him with some ridicule. Lu Yi didn't respond. Did he regret it? There didn't seem to be anything to regret. "Let's start the transaction," Lu Yi said. Yen Miao curled her lips, feeling that this young human in front of her must be sick, otherwise, how could he have resisted the situation just now? She clapped her hands and the door was opened. Strong mermen walked in carrying a large box. A dozen or so boxes lined up in front of Lu Yi. Yen Miao had the mermen open the boxes, and in an instant, light illuminated the surroundings. These boxes were filled with spirit crystals. Miao Miao said, "These are all the spirit crystals that my clan can use right now. I don't know how many of those formation discs you have, but you can give them as you see fit. In addition, my clan needs you to inscribe 200 formation runes. Do you have any problems with that?" "No problem at all." The mermaid clan was indeed a generous race. Of course, this was also related to their current special living environment. With such a large spirit jade vein, they could produce spirit crystals frequently, so they naturally did not lack these things. Comparatively speaking, Lu Yi was completely worthless to him. Inscribing runes was something he could do casually. Lu Yi had profited greatly from this transaction. He suddenly realized that the richer one would be. Previously, he had to work hard to obtain spirit jades for his cultivation, but now he did not have to worry about that at all. He took out all the remaining formation discs he had on him and gave them to Miao Yen. There were hundreds of them, which made Miao Yen beam with joy. He then took out a storage ring, poured out the seaweed inside, and stuffed the spirit crystals into it. Miao Miao and the group of mermaids were speechless as they watched from the side. They felt that Li Taibai was too poor. He even collected the seaweed outside the temple as if it was a treasure. After a while, they finally collected all the spirit crystals. "Little friend, if you have time now, I will arrange for someone to come over," Miao Yen said. Lu Yi nodded. After Miao Yen led the group of mermaids away, he sat down and took out various tools for inscribing runes. After a while, a long line formed in front of the door. Obviously, Miao Yen had arranged for the candidates to be inscribed. They were all female mermaids. All of them had outstanding figures and beautiful appearances. Their small hands were soft as if they were boneless. When Lu Yi grabbed their hands to inscribe runes, there were even bold mermaids who scratched his palm. They were slapped hard by Lu Yi and became obedient. 200 mermaids, no matter how fast Lu Yi was, took almost a day to finish inscribing. After the last mermaid left, Lu Yi breathed a sigh of relief. The matter of the mermaid clan was settled. He had also toured the place under Bai Lu's guidance. Lu Yi didn't plan to stay here any longer. It was more important to hurry back to the Constellation Hall. Just as he was packing up, a head suddenly poked in at the door. Lu Yi looked up and found that it was Bai Lu. Their eyes met and embarrassment flashed in Bai Lu's eyes, but she still said, "No one is here, right?" Lu Yi shook his head, not knowing why she was acting so sneakily. Only then did Bai Lu flash in and pull out another person from behind her. When Lu Yi saw her, he quickly got up and bowed, "Your Majesty." Bai Lu had actually brought the Mermaid Queen. Although she was young and her cultivation wasn't too high, her status was there. Lu Yi couldn't help but pay attention to her. He looked at Bai Lu curiously, not knowing why she had brought the queen here, and why she was acting so sneakily. "Bai Shuang also wants a tattoo. Can you inscribe one for her?" Bai Lu asked. Bai Shuang should be the queen's name. Lu Yi said, "I can, but do the Great Elder and the others know about this?" Bai Lu said, "You can't tell them, they won't agree." This was also the reason why she had secretly brought her sister here. Lu Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry and immediately said, "If the Great Elder and the others don't agree, this can't be done. If they offended the Mermaid clan because of this, it wouldn't be worth it. It's okay, the Great Elder and the others just don't allow any damage to the queen's body, but if it's a tattoo, it won't cause too much damage." Bai Lu persuaded. Bai Shuang also said something at this time, looking at Lu Yi eagerly, like a pitiful child who had seen her favorite toy but couldn't get it. Meeting her clear eyes, Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh. In the end, she was just a child who hadn't grown up. Although she was a queen, this queen's seat was probably not something she wanted to sit on. Lu Yi could refuse Bai Lu because Bai Lu was an adult, but he couldn't bear to refuse a child's request. "Come." He sat down again. Seeing this, Bai Shuang immediately smiled and quickly stepped forward, stretching out her small hand. She had clearly asked Bai Lu about the tattoo before, so she knew what to do at this time. Lu Ye's previous actions were very quick, and his expression was also very casual because it wasn't difficult for him, but this time his expression was meticulous, and he did his best to do it perfectly. After a short while, Lu Yi nodded, "It's done." Bai Shuang withdrew her hand and felt the tattoo on the back of her hand, smiling even more happily. She then raised her head and said something to Lu Yi, and Bai Lu explained, "Bai Shuang said she wanted to give you a gift." Without waiting for Lu Yi to refuse, Bai Shuang took out a conch from somewhere and gently pressed it against Lu Ye's forehead. This conch looked somewhat familiar. If it was magnified countless times, it should look like the Emperor Conch Palace. Moreover, Lu Yi had seen such a conch before. Yan Miao had one. On the way here from the Constellation Palace, a moon jade star beast had attacked. Yan Miao had blown the conch in her hand, and the moon jade star beast had retreated. However, the conch in Miao Yan's hand was golden, while the one in Bai Shuang's hand was jade. Lu Yi didn't know what the difference was. The tip of the conch touched Lu Ye's forehead, and he immediately felt as if a mark had appeared on his forehead. Other than that, he didn't feel anything else. He looked at Bai Lu in confusion and Bai Lu smiled. There are a few forbidden areas in the merfolk's territory. Normally no one is allowed to enter. One of them is called the Celestial Conch Palace, and it's a special secret realm. Bai Shuang's gift to you is a chance to enter this palace. Lu Yi hesitated. Since it's a forbidden area, it's not very good for me to go in, right? Bai Lu said, "You are an esteemed guest of our clan, and you have the queen's mark. Of course you can enter." Lu Yi was about to ask more about the Celestial Conch Palace when Bai Lu hurriedly said, "There's not much time left. I'll send the queen back first. I'll come find you later." Saying so, she walked out with Bai Shuang. Before leaving, Bai Shuang looked back at Lu Yi as if she was reluctant to leave. Lu Yi suddenly found that being the king of this clan didn't seem to be a happy thing. Bai Shuang was so young, but there seemed to be all kinds of restrictions. Children of other clans didn't have such worries. He was already prepared to leave, but Bai Shuang gave him a chance to enter the Celestial Conch Palace. Lu Yi decided to ask Bai Lu about the Celestial Conch Palace later. If it was really not suitable, then he wouldn't go in so as not to offend the other party. After a while, Bai Lu came back and called out to Lu Yi, "Let's go." Lu Yi said, "Can you tell me about the Celestial Conch Palace?" Bai Lu kept him in suspense. "It won't be fun if I tell you, but there's no danger there. You can rest assured that if you can pass the test of the Celestial Conch Palace, you can get some benefits. That place is a very interesting secret realm, I won't lie to you." She looked relaxed and happy as if she had forgotten the previous awkwardness. Seeing this, Lu Yi couldn't say anything more and could only let nature take its course. Soon the two arrived at the celestial conch palace. Lu Yi found that this was indeed a forbidden area, because when Bai Lu took him here before, she deliberately bypassed it. The celestial conch palace was inside the Emperor Conch Palace. Although it was a forbidden area, there were no mermaids guarding it. Thinking of the mark that Bai Shuang gave him, Lu Yi guessed that only those with the mark could enter the celestial conch palace. That was to say, they must have Bai Shuang's permission, so there was no need for anyone to guard it. The entrance of the celestial conch palace was just a door, nothing special. Bai Lu said, "You go in, I'll wait for you outside." "You're not going in with me?" Lu Yi asked. Bai Lu said, "Everyone can only enter the celestial conch palace once in their life. I've been in there long ago." Chapter 1457. What should I do after I enter? Lu Yi asked. Since Bai Lu said there was no danger in this secret realm, there was no need to fight. Bai Lu said mysteriously, "You'll know when you enter." Saying so, he gave Lu Yi a push and reminded him, "That's right, put away your saber." Lu Yi had no choice but to put away his saber, push open the door and walk into the Tianluo Hall. When he took a step out, Lu Yi found himself in darkness. He couldn't even see his fingers in front of him. This was a kind of pure darkness. Even a constellation like him couldn't see anything. He tried to use his divine thoughts, but he could only sense a few feet around him. There seemed to be a strange power in the Tianluo Hall that greatly suppressed his various abilities. Lu Yi didn't panic because he didn't feel any dangerous aura. Just as he was looking around, a dot of fluorescent light suddenly appeared in his field of vision. Then there were 2 dots, 3 dots, and a large area. In an instant, Lu Yi felt as if he was in the starry sky, and the large area of light dots were stars. These fluorescent lights were of different colors. Some were white, some were green, some were blue, some were purple, and some were gold. The multicolored light was like a swarm of fireflies, circling around his position, dancing in the air. Lu Yi was curious because he couldn't see the nature of these light dots. He raised his hand to grab a light dot, but the light dot nimbly dodged like a playful girl. The large area of light dots danced for a while before a part of them broke away and floated in front of Lu Yi. Then these light dots gathered and merged with each other. Soon a flute-like thing floated in front of Lu Yi. Lu Yi was slightly puzzled. He didn't know what was going on. Bai Lu said that as long as he passed the test here there would be benefits. But now Lu Yi didn't see any test at all, and a flute condensed from light dots appeared in front of him. Was this the benefit? He didn't know what was so special about this flute. With this thought in mind, he reached out and grabbed the flute. It was warm to the touch as if he was holding a jade flute. At the same time, the flute vibrated slightly, and a message appeared in Lu Ye's mind. Blow. He suddenly understood. So this was the test. But how could he know how to play the flute? Ever since he came to the 9 prefectures, he had been struggling to survive. The upper realm of cultivation was something that he had never touched before. None of his friends were proficient in this field. However, since this was the Heavenly Spiral Hall's test, he could only brace himself and face it. Although Lu Yi wasn't proficient in this field, he still knew how to play it. He held the flute horizontally, placed it near his mouth, and gently pressed the sound hole with a few fingers. As soon as he exhaled, an ear-piercing sound of the flute rang out. He didn't know how to coordinate the fingers that were pressing on the sound hole, so he just casually moved them up and down. When the sound of the flute rang out, the specks of light that were constantly circling around him seemed to have been struck by lightning, and stagnated for a moment. Lu Yi knew that there was a 98% chance that he would pass this test, so he didn't care about it and just bragged about it. The specks of light seemed to have intelligence. They couldn't stand the ear-piercing noise, and another batch of specks of light separated. The flute in Lu Ye's hand also dispersed, and the 2 waves of specks of light converged together, constantly changing. Then Lu Yi saw a blurry figure appear in front of him. It seemed to be a human figure, but he couldn't see it clearly. At this moment, the figure was holding a flute, putting it near his mouth and gently blowing it. The pleasant sound of the flute immediately entered Lu Ye's ears. Strangely, when the sound of the flute sounded, the spiritual power in Lu Ye's body suddenly flowed a lot faster. He was shocked. This flute sound had the effect of increasing combat power. If the spiritual power in a cultivator's body flowed faster, then no matter what kind of secret arts they used, or if they fought with others in close combat, their strength would definitely increase. He immediately understood that he was too bad at bragging. These specks of light couldn't bear to see it, so they deliberately demonstrated it to him, which could be regarded as a temporary teaching. He carefully observed the posture of the blurry figure holding the flute, and the rhythm of the rising and falling fingers, silently memorizing it in his heart. After one song, the figure disappeared, and the flute reappeared in front of Lu Yi. Lu Yi grabbed it again and played according to what he had seen just now. Compared to the messy playing just now this time, it was clearly much more pleasant to the ear, but it was also choppy and incoherent. As Lu Yi played, specks of light constantly drifted away. By the time he finished playing, more than half of the specks of light had disappeared. Lu Yi felt that he had played it well, but he didn't know why those specks of light looked so disdainful. Bai Lu said that this place was very interesting. Indeed, it was very interesting to people who were proficient in music, but to him it wasn't interesting at all. If the test here had anything to do with music, then he had no hope of passing it. The flute suddenly dispersed and turned into specks of light, but it didn't disappear. Instead, it wriggled and changed again. Lu Yi watched quietly, guessing that the test was probably not over yet. It was somewhat torturous. Although the test wasn't dangerous, Lu Yi would rather have a big battle with the skeleton generals. Within a short while, an arrow appeared in front of Lu Yi. It seemed that Lu Yi had experienced it before, so before she could try it, a blurry figure appeared and played a passionate melody to demonstrate to Lu Yi. Just like the flute just now, the music of the arrow also had the effect of increasing one's combat strength. Lu Yi helplessly picked up the arrow and imitated the figure to play a melody. As expected, the remaining specks of light in the surroundings decreased. The arrow turned into specks of light and wriggled and changed for the third time. A moment later, a peeper appeared in front of Lu Yi. Just like before, a blurry figure appeared again. With a light flick of the fingers, a simple instrument unrestrainedly produced a moving melody. By the time Lu Yi finished playing the pipa, there weren't many specks of light left in the surroundings. Seeing the pipa turn into specks of light and wriggle and change again, the corners of Lu Yi's eyes twitched. The previous 3 tests were about playing the flute. Could it be that the 4th test was about singing? What kind of bullshit was this test? He seriously suspected that Bai Lu was taking revenge on him. The merfolk were all multi-talented. After entering the Celestial Spiral Palace, they probably wouldn't have a problem passing the test here. However, for a weapon cultivator like him who was used to fighting and killing, entering this place was simply torture. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have come. More importantly, he didn't know how to get out now because there was no place to leave at all. Under his torturous gaze, the specks of light turned into a figure. However, this time the figure was more solid than the previous 3 times. Other than the fact that he couldn't see the face clearly, he could see the basic outline. It could be seen that the figure was a curvaceous woman and a mermaid at that. Because her lower body was shaped like a fish's tail, she opened her mouth slightly and sang softly. Lu Yi felt a headache coming on. What kind of bullshit Celestial Spiral Palace is this? Just change its name to Celestial Spiral Palace. But soon, Lu Yi found that something was wrong, because the woman was not only singing but also dancing. Her movements were extremely enchanting. As she sang and danced, Lu Yi's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. It was fine if she wanted him to play music or simply sing, but it was absolutely impossible for him to sing and dance like this. He was Lu Yi of the 9 prefectures. How could he not care about his reputation? When the figure finished singing, the dance also stopped and turned back into specks of light. Lu Yi knew that it was his turn. It had been like this for the previous few times. The figure would demonstrate and then he would learn. But this time he absolutely couldn't learn. He stood there quietly without moving, thinking that if he didn't pass the test he would definitely be able to leave. But he waited for a full day. He didn't move, and the specks of light flying around his body didn't have any other reaction, as if they were waiting quietly. Lu Yi had no choice but to walk around to see if he could find a way out. After searching for a long time he couldn't find anything. Wherever he went, the specks of light would follow, as if they wouldn't let him leave until he participated in the test. Lu Yi knew that regardless of whether he could pass this test or not, he had to participate. Glaring hatefully at the few remaining specks of light, Lu Yi cleared his throat and looked around with a guilty conscience, fearing that someone was spying on him nearby. Only then did he open his mouth and sing. He didn't know what he was singing because the figure just sang in the language of the mermaid race. The language of the mermaid race was extremely difficult to pronounce. He didn't have a systematic learning, so he couldn't sing it at all. Forcing himself to imitate it was naturally unpleasant. After a while, the specks of light flying around suddenly disappeared without a trace. The world was quiet. Lu Yi was in endless darkness and there was no light at all. "Let me out!" Lu Yi shouted. The test was undoubtedly a failure. Since he failed, he should be let out of here, but he still didn't see any hope of leaving. It was as if he had been abandoned here. After shouting a few times, there was still no response. The corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. He couldn't say that he had to sing and dance once, could he? He just sang and didn't dance yet. If this was the reason why he couldn't leave, it would be uncomfortable. Although there was no one around, Lu Yi really didn't want to do that, lest it become a darkness in his heart that could never be erased, and that would become a knot in his heart. But thinking about it carefully, Lu Yi felt that something was wrong. This was the secret realm of the mermaid race. Since ancient times, many mermaids should have come here. In terms of talent, he, a human, naturally couldn't be compared with the multi-talented mermaids. In comparison, he undoubtedly failed every test. But the mermaid's talent must also be high and low. It couldn't be said that everyone had to follow the highest standards. Then there wouldn't be many mermaids who could leave here. So Lu Yi thought that as long as he passed one of the tests, he would be fine. Chapter 1458. With this in mind, her train of thought suddenly opened up. There were only 4 kinds of tests in the Tianluo Hall. Wind, string, singing, and finally dancing. Lu Yi couldn't count on the first 3. It was too late to learn now, not to mention that she didn't have anything suitable to learn. Dancing was even more impossible. That was a field that Lu Yi would never touch. So the only thing she could count on was singing. In fact, Lu Yi felt that she still had some talent in singing, but she just learned the language of the merfolk. After a little hesitation, Lu Ye's expression was dignified, and she began to sing in a low voice. Calabash brothers, 7 flowers on a vine, not afraid of wind and rain, la 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 la, jing dang dong dong dong, Calabash brothers, jing dang dong dong dong, great ability, la 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 la. While Lu Yi was testing her skills in the Tianluo Hall, a group of mere people also had dignified and anxious expressions. Bai Lu was almost crying. Because Li Taibai had been in the Tianluo Hall for almost 2 days, and he still hadn't come out. This had never happened before. In the past, when the mere people entered the Tianluo Hall to participate in the tests, it often only took an hour for the results to come out. The longest record was only 4 hours. This was obviously abnormal. Bai Lu knew that she had made a mistake. Something must have happened to Li Taibai in the Tianluo Hall. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to not appear for so long. Nonsense. Yan Miao reprimanded. The Tianluo Hall is a secret territory attached to the Huangluo Palace. For generations, only our mere people have entered. There has never been a precedent for outsiders to enter. No one knows what the consequences will be if outsiders enter. Why didn't you discuss it with me? Bai Lu lowered her head and said, I thought there would be no problem and the tests inside are not dangerous. Our people have never been in danger inside. But she knew that the great elder was right. Since ancient times, only the mere people had entered the Tianluo Hall. Now that a human had suddenly entered, who knew if his experience was the same as the mere people? Yan Miao didn't know what to say. She knew that this matter couldn't be blamed on Bai Lu. To let Li Taibai enter the Tianluo Hall, it must be the queen's right, so the queen must be involved in this matter. However, the queen was the queen after all. No matter how young she was, no one could reprimand her. Great elder, can you find a way to open the heavenly spiral hall? I'll go in and see what's wrong with him. Bai Lu asked. At the very least, she had to know whether Li Taibai was alive or dead inside. Miao Yin shook his head. Once someone enters the heavenly spiral hall, it will be completely sealed. No one can open it. But now we can be sure that he is not dead. Otherwise, the heavenly spiral hall would not remain sealed. Bai Lu naturally understood this principle, but after such a long time, Li Taibai still showed no signs of coming out. She couldn't help but feel anxious. If Li Taibai really died in there this time, then Bai Shuang would definitely blame herself for the rest of her life. As her elder sister, it would be difficult for her to escape the blame. While the Merfolk clan waited anxiously outside the hall, Lu Yi sat down cross-legged inside the conch hall and sang several songs. Naturally, he couldn't learn the singing of the Merfolk. He could only sing some of the things he knew. In the beginning, his voice was still very low, but as he sang, he let it go. Anyway, there was no one here and no one knew what was going on. At this moment, the sonorous singing voice reverberated in the endless darkness. When the sun comes out, I climb the hillside. When I climb to the top, I want to sing. My song floats to my sister. When she hears my song, she laughs. In the darkness, where there was no light at all, a little fluorescent light appeared at some point. It was as if stars were rotating around him, and as his singing drifted, the number of these fluorescent lights increased. When Lu Yi saw that there was hope, he sang even harder. It was estimated that these light spots had only heard the gentle singing of the merfolk clan. They had never heard such a different style of singing, so there were so many of them. The sky above my head is a man's sky. The young man who once dreamed under the starry sky doesn't know how high the sky is, doesn't know how far the sea is. But I vowed to take you far away to the ends of the earth. Lu Ye's mouth was dry from singing. Although the light spots attracted more and more, and had turned into a sea of stars, he still didn't feel that he could leave here. Something seemed wrong. Judging from the reaction of these light spots, if his performance was too poor, they would disperse. On the contrary, they would gather. With so many light spots gathered, it stood to reason that he should have passed the test, so why couldn't he leave? As he sang, he frowned and observed the light spots. Just like when Lu Yi had first entered, these dots of light were of different colors. Most of them were white and the least were gold. However, in terms of quantity, there were at least 10 times more than what he had seen when he first entered. Previously, whenever Lu Yi sang a song, many dots of light would be attracted to her, but now no new dots of light appeared. He estimated that most of the light spots had been attracted. After a moment of silence, Lu Yi stretched out his hand and grabbed at the nearest light spot while singing. A scene that surprised him appeared. When he first entered this Tianluo temple, he also wanted to grab a light spot to see what it was, but the light spot avoided him like a playful girl, not letting him touch it. But at this moment, when he stretched out his hand, it seemed to contain an endless suction force, and a large number of light spots gathered towards his big hand. In an instant, Lu Ye's hand blossomed with multicolored light. His heart trembling, Lu Yi faintly understood that he could choose a light spot and take it out. That would be the reward for passing the Tianluo temple's test. But because there were too many light spots gathered, he didn't know which one to choose. He finally understood that it wasn't that the test wasn't over, but that he hadn't noticed and had instead been singing and singing. With this in mind, Lu Yi had a plan. Since he had to choose a light spot, he naturally had to choose the rarer one. After all, the rarer something was, the more valuable it was. Therefore his target was the golden light spots. But there were also many golden light spots, so Lu Yi couldn't make a choice for a while, let alone know what kind of reward he would receive. So he simply decided to pick one at random. Just as he was about to move, Lu Yi suddenly looked to the side. Over there was a green dot of light. Previously it was surrounded by many light spots, so Lu Yi didn't notice it at all. After all, it was too small and surrounded by multicolored light, so the blue light wasn't too conspicuous. At this moment, a large number of light spots gathered towards his hand, revealing the blue light spot. Lu Yi immediately changed his mind and gently shook his hand, shaking off the countless light spots attached to his hand and grabbing the blue light spot. This thing was even rarer than the golden light, so it might be the only one. As if sensing Lu Ye's intentions, the green dot of light also rushed towards him and was caught by Lu Ye's hand. Lu Yi vaguely felt that he had caught something, but before he had time to look, he saw the countless light spots floating around him, then converging and changing, turning into a light door in front of him. This must be the door to leave. Lu Yi stood up and took a step forward. His vision changed and he appeared outside the Tianluo temple. As far as his eyes could see, there were many relieved faces. He was extremely surprised. "Great Elder and all the other elders, why are you all here?" Miao Yen let out a long breath, his already majestic chest heaving up and down. "Little friend Tai Bai, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Lu Yi nodded and put away the things he brought out of the Tianluo temple. Miao Yen nodded. "It's good that you're fine. Because you stayed inside for too long, we were worried that something might happen to you, so we stayed here." Only then did Lu Yi understand the worry in their eyes. Glancing at Bai Lu and seeing the self-blame in her eyes, he smiled. "My skills are not good enough, so it took me a long time to pass the test of the Tianluo temple." Miao Yen said, "Since you're fine, I'm relieved." Lu Yi said, "This matter is over, so I should go back." The main purpose of coming here was to make a deal with the mermaid clan. Now that the deal was completed, there was no need to continue to stay. He also wanted to finish the task of the Constellation Hall as soon as possible and see if he could rush back before the end of the ranking battle. Miao Yen showed a little apologetic. "There's something I want to tell, little friend. Didn't I promise you before to send some people to help the temple get rid of those sundries? But the people my clan sent out reported that they couldn't get close to the periphery of the temple at all. On the contrary, they could directly enter the temple without any hindrance, so my clan may not be able to help with the sundries." "They can directly enter the temple but can't get close to the periphery. What's the reason for this?" Lu Yi was puzzled. Miao Yen shook his head. "I don't know. Perhaps I need to investigate it myself to understand. If little friend wants to go back, I'll send you off and take a look at the situation there. All right. Lu Yi nodded. Leaving as soon as he said so, Miao Yin immediately called for a few seahorse mounts and led a few of his clansmen to lead Lu Yi towards the Constellation Hall. This time Bai Lu didn't go with them, seemingly because of the previous matter. Before leaving, Bai Lu apologized to Lu Yi. Lu Yi naturally didn't take the matter of the Tianluo temple to heart. Bai Lu hadn't done it on purpose, and Bai Shuang had given him the opportunity to enter the Tianluo temple out of kindness. Although the process was a little complicated, Lu Yi still benefited from it. This could be considered a strange experience on the road of life. With Miao Yin leading the way, there was no need to worry about encountering any danger along the way. Although there were Sunshine Star beasts in the 10,000 Elephant Sea, there weren't many of them. Moreover, each Sunshine Star beast had its own fixed territory. As long as one didn't rashly intrude into their territory, there was basically no need to worry about provoking them. For example, the last time Lu Yi encountered a Sunshine Star beast, it was a rare occurrence for the Mermaid clan. Chapter 1459. Half a day later, the group arrived at the Constellation Hall. Entering the hall, Lu Yi saw at a glance at least 100 mermen gathered here. They were obviously the men sent by Smoky Meow. Seeing Smoky Meow's arrival, one of the mermen stepped forward and respectfully reported to Smoky Meow. After hearing this, Smoky Meow said something else. Then he looked at Lu Yi. Little friend, let's go out and take a look. Okay. Lu Yi naturally had no objections. He also wanted to know what Smoky Meow meant when he said these mermen couldn't get close to the periphery of the temple. Soon, a large group of mermen came out of the Constellation Hall and came outside. Under Smoky Meow's instructions, these mermen rushed in all directions of the Constellation Hall, but Lu Yi saw clearly that no matter which merman it was, the closer they were to the Constellation Hall, the harder it was to move forward. It was as if the entire Constellation Hall was filled with an invisible force field, preventing the mermen from approaching. Almost all the mermen stopped at a distance of 30 feet from the Constellation Hall, their expressions difficult as they resisted the invisible force. This was strange. Lu Yi had been weeding here before, but he had never encountered such a thing. He couldn't say that something had changed in the Constellation Hall in the few days he had been away, could he? If so, it would be troublesome. With this thought, he hurriedly flew forward. Under the surprised gazes of the mermen, he easily stuck to the wall of the Constellation Hall without the slightest hindrance. He tried to remove the seaweed on the wall, but there was no problem at all. Seeing this, Smoky Meow also rushed over, but like the other mermen, she couldn't get close to the Constellation Hall at all. A moment later, Lu Yi and Smoky Meow returned to the Constellation Hall again. Smoky Meow expressed his feelings. Little friend, the temple seems to be very resistant to our approach. I feel that if we force our way close, it may cause some unpredictable consequences. But they could enter the Constellation Hall directly. I understand. Lu Yi nodded. Great Elder, please take your clansmen back. I can handle things here myself. Sorry. Smoky Meow showed an apologetic expression. My clan couldn't help with this matter. I originally promised you, it's not your fault. Lu Yi suspected that the Constellation Hall was tormenting him. Otherwise, there was no reason for them to resist the approach of the merfolk. On the contrary, he could easily stick to them. Therefore, he really couldn't be blamed for this matter. Yen Miao had mobilized over 100 clansmen to help, which was already a great show of sincerity. Yen Miao left with the mer people. Before leaving, he told Lu Yi that if he was bored here, he could go to the merpeople's territory. The door of the merpeople's territory was always open for him. After they left, Lu Ye's face was filled with resentment as he continued to weed. Originally, he thought that with the help of the mermaid clan, he might be able to complete the matters here earlier and rush back to participate in the ranking battle. But now it seemed that this idea was ruined. He could only do the matters here himself. What are you trying to do? Lu Ye's divine sense surged as he weeded. The Constellation Hall had its own consciousness, and Lu Yi was sure that it could hear his words. However, what made Lu Yi feel helpless was that the Constellation Hall did not respond to his question at all. Lu Yi thought about it. He had not offended the Constellation Hall in any way. Ever since the Constellation Hall opened, he had participated in all kinds of battles like the other cultivators. How did he end up being dragged here to do manual labor? He was only worried about one thing now, and that was whether he had enough fire-type treasures in reserve. This was because under the 10,000 Elephant Sea, the fuel consumption of his talent tree was too severe. Moreover, weeding in such an environment was really not fast and there was no way to leave. Lu Yi could only bear the burden without complaint. After thinking about it, if he really had no other choice, he could only ask Yen Miao to escort him and see if he could directly swim out of the 10,000 elephant sea. Yen Miao had a conch that could expel the lunar constellation. As long as they did not encounter any sunshine star beasts along the way, there was basically no great danger. Weeding, resting, and then letting his talent tree devour the power of fire-type treasures to replenish its fuel consumption. Lu Ye's days were dull and monotonous. After a few days of this, Lu Yi, who was replenishing his talent tree's fuel in the main hall, suddenly remembered something and hurriedly took it out. It was a conch only the size of a baby's fist. Its entire body was green, and it was something he had brought out of the heavenly conch hall. Previously, when he brought it out, he saw Yen Miao and the other mermaids waiting outside the heavenly conch hall at a glance. Lu Yi did not have the time to carefully examine it before putting it away. Thus, before this, he did not know what he had brought out of the heavenly conch hall. At this moment, Lu Yi suddenly realized that this conch was exactly the same as the one in Yen Miao's hand, except for the color. His mind shook. This thing, could it have the same effect as the one in Yen Miao's hand? If so, then there was hope for him to leave this place. Lu Yi finally understood where Yen Miao's conch came from. She had obviously obtained it from the heavenly conch hall as a reward, but her was a golden conch while his was a blue sea conch. It seemed that the countless fluorescent lights in the heavenly conch hall represented conches. If a cultivator entered and passed the test, they could take one as a reward. After fiddling with it for a while, he put the conch to his mouth and gently blew on it. There was a low sound, but it was just a simple sound without the slightest trace of mysterious power. Lu Yi thought for a moment, then poured his spiritual power into the conch as he blew on it. This time, a miraculous power surged out. Lu Yi clearly saw the tip of the conch but began to flicker with a green light. Moreover, as he poured his spiritual power into it, the green light became brighter and brighter. He understood that his blue sea conch was most likely not the same as Yen Miao's golden sea conch. It did not have the power to expel the moon jade star beast. As for what kind of power it had, it was unknown for now. After a while, when the conch's light reached its peak, the green light suddenly swept out and stopped not far in front of Lu Yi. Then the green light spread out like a splash of green ink, dyeing the space in front of him green. Lu Yi looked at the scene in front of him with a strange expression. Because the area that was dyed green, no matter how he looked at it, it looked like a door that led to an unknown place. However, Lu Yi felt that this door was not stable enough. If he forced his way through it, he would inevitably encounter some unpredictable danger. He could only continue to blow on it with his cheeks puffed up. At the same time, he continued to pour his spiritual power into the conch. The green light became more and more solid, and the door stabilized at a speed visible to the naked eye. After several breaths, Lu Yi stopped and stared blankly in front of him. It was indeed a door. The green light was spinning and there was a vortex in the middle. Lu Yi tried to sense the aura inside but found nothing. There was only one question now. This door. Where did it lead to? Lu Yi had a bold guess in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he still stepped in. If he wanted to verify his guess, he would have to explore it himself. However, before he stepped in, Lu Yi had already pressed down on the mountain pan saber at his waist. He gathered his spiritual power, ready for any unexpected situations. His body paused slightly as if he had passed through some kind of membrane. His vision blurred, and he found that he was no longer in the Constellation Hall. He looked around and found it familiar. When he looked back, it was just as he thought. The door led to the entrance of the Celestial Conch Hall. Lu Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had only left the merfolk's territory for a few days and now he was back. If he had known earlier, he would have tried the effect of the Azure Sea Snail before he left, so as not to waste time. The merfolk's voice came from not far away. Lu Yi scratched his head. He felt a little guilty. The last time he came here he was invited. This time he entered uninvited, which didn't seem very good. But then again, when Yen Miao left the Constellation Hall, she said that he could come here if he was bored. The door of the merfolk was always open for him, so it didn't seem to matter if he entered uninvited. And if the Azure Sea Snail had such a strange effect, he really had to greet the merfolk. Otherwise, if he appeared here like a ghost, who knew what they would think? Lu Yi turned his head and looked at the place where he came from. There was a door similar to the one in the Constellation Hall. It hadn't disappeared. Lu Yi felt that he could return to the Constellation Hall through this door. He couldn't have opened a void corridor from the Constellation Hall to here, right? Did the Azure Sea Snail have such a strange power? Two merfolk came into view. It seemed that they were passing by. After seeing Lu Yi, they were both stunned, but they quickly reacted and hurriedly stepped forward to salute him. When Lu Yi came here before, Bai Lu took him around and saw a lot of merfolk. So even if the merfolk here hadn't seen Lu Yi with their own eyes, they knew that they had a human guest. After thinking about it, Lu Yi said, "Can you help me call Bai Lu?" Of course, the merfolk didn't understand. The two merfolk looked at him in confusion and replied with a sentence, which Lu Yi didn't understand. It was a pity that the two merfolk were both men. Otherwise, they could have used enlightenment on him to facilitate communication. Fortunately, they weren't stupid. They couldn't communicate on their own, so they knew to find someone who could. One of them stayed while the other left in a hurry. Obviously, they were looking for Bai Lu, Yan Miao, or the other elders. Lu Yi waited quietly, but after a while he found that something was wrong. The door in front of him began to become unstable, as if it was about to collapse. Lu Yi looked at the door, hesitated for a moment, and then quickly said to the merfolk who stayed, "Bai Lu is here. Let her know. I'll come back and explain the situation to her later." Regardless of whether the other party understood or not, he rushed into the door in a flash. He had to quickly verify his thoughts while the door was still open. The feeling of breaking through the membrane appeared again. His vision blurred again, and Lu Yi found that he had returned to the Constellation Hall. Chapter 1460. When Lu Yi returned to the Constellation Hall through the door in front of him suddenly disappeared, as if it had run out of energy. Lu Yi looked at the Azure Sea conch in his hand and roughly understood its function. This thing was a directional teleportation treasure. By activating its power, it could condense a door to the entrance of the Celestial Conch Hall. Lu Yi could go through and return through the door. What was the use of this? The mermaid clan's territory was only half a day's journey from here. If Lu Yi wanted to go, he just needed to be careful and he could rush over by himself. It was not as good as the Golden Sea Conch in Yan Miao's hand. At the very least, that thing had the power to expel the Moonjade Star Beast. Lu Yi felt that he had suffered a loss. At that time there were so many golden light spots around him, but he had chosen the cyan one. He had thought that cyan was unique and would definitely be the best, but now it seemed that this was not the case at all. It was too late to return now. A person could only enter the Celestial Conch Hall once in their lifetime. But on second thought, the Azure Sea Conch's power did not seem to be as useless as he thought. Because they were under the 10,000 Elephant Sea, the rich and pure seawater obstructed him. Even his divine sense was suppressed to 3 inches from his body, but the connection between the Azure Sea Conch and the Celestial Conch Hall was not affected at all. It could directly condense a door to the Celestial Conch Hall. Of course, such a door was not very useful, but what if he returned to the 10,000 Elephant Sea one day? At that time, if the door could still be used, it would be very useful. The mermaid clan was very interested in the spirit pills outside, and there were extremely rich cultivation resources under the sea. Not to mention other things, how could the various star beasts be inferior to Bai Ling? If the portal could still be used at that time, he could buy Ling Dan and sell it to the mermaid clan, and then buy some underwater specialties from the mermaid clan. Doing this back and forth, it would be difficult not to make a fortune. Realizing this, Lu Ye's mood was somewhat excited because this way, he would no longer have to worry about cultivation resources in the future. And this was his unique way of making money. The only Cyan Sea Conch had an extraordinary effect. At the gate of the Tianluo Hall, Bai Lu, who had received the news, hurried over, but did not see any trace of Lu Yi. After asking the mermaid who stayed here, she learned that Lu Yi had hurriedly left through a portal, and that strange portal had disappeared without a trace after Lu Yi left. Bai Lu vaguely felt that something was wrong, because no door had ever appeared outside this Tianluo Hall. She wanted to report this to Yan Miao, but she was afraid of bringing trouble to Lu Yi. For a moment, she could only instruct the two mermaids who had seen Lu Yi not to disclose this matter. The two mermaids' cultivation bases were not high, and they were also men. Their status in the clan was low, so they naturally did not dare to disobey the princess's orders. In the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi still wanted to activate the power of the Azure Sea Snail. In any case, he had to inform the merfolk about this and let them know that he could enter their territory with the help of the Azure Sea Snail. This kind of thing couldn't be concealed, and if they really wanted to reach a long-term cooperative relationship with the Mer people, this matter couldn't be concealed. However, Lu Yi helplessly discovered that when he blew on the Azure Sea Snail again, no matter how much spiritual energy he poured into it, there was no reaction. This thing couldn't be a rare treasure that could only be used once, right? If that was the case, then his previous plan could not be carried out. But if it was a rare treasure, it should have been broken at this moment. The azure sea snail was not damaged in any way, but it could not be used. Lu Yi vaguely guessed that perhaps after using it once, it could not be used a second time for a certain period of time. Lu Yi was slightly surprised when he used his divine sense to investigate. This was because the azure sea snail was the size of a baby's fist in his hand, but when his divine sense probed it, it seemed to explore the inside of a vast void. Inside this azure sea snail, there was an extremely strange huge space. Inside the space, all kinds of mysterious patterns crisscrossed, as if they contained great truths. Lu Yi vaguely saw many traces of void spirit veins in it. The azure sea snail had the effect of condensing the door to the Tianluo Hall. In essence, it was a directional transmission treasure, so it was not surprising that there were void spirit veins hidden inside. These patterns were undoubtedly very useful to Lu Yi, because they could become the foundation for Lu Yi to deduce new spirit veins. For the time being, Lu Yi could not activate the power of the azure sea snail, so he could not go to the mermaid clan's territory to explain the situation to them. He could only focus on weeding. Every time he returned to the Constellation Hall to replenish his talent tree's fuel, Lu Yi would study the mystery of the azure sea snail. Soon he discovered one thing. The power of the azure sea snail could not be activated for the time being, so it could not condense the door to the Tianluo Hall, but it had another effect. That was to leave a mark. Lu Yi could leave a mark that belonged to the azure sea snail in the Constellation Hall. The mark looked like the shape of a sea snail. This mark could be removed at any time with the azure sea snail, and it could be maintained for a long time. Lu Yi did not know the specific limit, because he only left it for more than a day before removing it. Lu Yi had some guesses about the specific use of this mark, but before he could verify it, he had to go to the mermaid clan's territory first. But before he could do anything, Bai Lu ran over. Lu Yi, who was weeding, was very surprised to see Bai Lu. Although the Constellation Hall was only half a day's journey from the mermaid clan's territory, the 10,000 Elephant Sea was not peaceful, so Bai Lu came alone. If she encountered any danger on the way, it would be very troublesome. "Why did you come alone?" Lu Yi asked when he returned to the Constellation Hall. Bai Lu said, 2 days ago 2 clansmen said they saw you at the entrance of the Tianluo Hall, and there was also a strange door, but when I went there you were already gone. I don't know if it was you or if something strange invaded our territory, so I came to verify. That was me. Lu Yi nodded quickly. Then why didn't you come find me? The situation was a bit urgent and I didn't have time. Lu Yi explained a little about what had happened, and took out his azure sea snail for Bai Lu to see. Bai Lu looked at it in amazement and played with Lu Ye's azure sea snail, saying, I did hear that the Tianluo Hall has an azure sea snail, but we've never seen one. The best sky snail in the clan is only golden. Li Taibai, you're really amazing to be able to get an azure sea snail. It's just good luck. Lu Yi knew that it wasn't that he was amazing, but that the songs he sang were completely different from the songs of the Merfolk clan. This made him seem unconventional, so he was able to attract the azure sea snail. It can open a door from here to the Tianluo Hall? Yes, but it can't be used yet. I don't know if it has lost its effect, or if it hasn't been used yet. Otherwise, I would have gone back to explain the situation to you. Bai Lu smiled. It's okay. She played with the azure sea snail for a while before handing it back to Lu Yi. Since it's still fine, it means it hasn't lost its effect. Let's wait, maybe it can suddenly be used. Lu Yi also thought so. After confirming that it was Lu Yi who had gone to the Merfolk clan's territory a few days ago, Bai Lu was obviously relieved. What about you? I'll send you back. Lu Yi said. No need, when you can use the azure sea snail you can naturally go back. There's nothing going on in the clan recently, so I'll wait here. That's up to you. Over the next few days, Bai Lu stayed at the Constellation Hall. Even when Lu Yi went to weed, she would ride her seahorse and follow. Unfortunately, she couldn't get close to the Constellation Hall, otherwise Lu Yi would have had one more helper. Every time Lu Yi returned to the Constellation Hall, she would pester Lu Yi to tell her about the outside world. As a member of the Merfolk clan who had lived in the Wanxiang Sea since childhood, she was naturally very curious about the outside world, so no matter what Lu Yi said, she would listen with great interest. Lu Yi could also see the longing and yearning in her eyes for the outside world. I seem to have heard from the great elder that you are a cursed clan. What's the situation? Lu Yi asked while they were chatting. Bai Lu said, I'm actually not too sure about the specific situation, it's something that happened a long time ago, but I've read some records in the clan's ancient records. It seems that our clan once provoked a very powerful enemy. That enemy had a very strange ability, so he cursed us. Originally, under this curse, our clan would eventually go extinct, but our ancestors were forced to come to the Wanxiang Sea and use the isolation of the sea water to avoid the fate of being poisoned to death by the curse. However, it's not just because of the curse that we have the ability to survive in the Wanxiang Sea, but because of this, we are completely trapped here because once we leave the Wanxiang Sea, we will immediately be cursed to death by the power of the curse. Lu Yi didn't know what kind of strange ability it was that made an entire clan helpless, and could only rely on the isolation of the Wanxiang Sea to hide. He was used to fighting and killing with others, but not everyone only knew how to fight and kill. Compared to open swords and spears, this kind of invisible power was the most terrifying. The fate of the Merfolk clan also reminded him that if he encountered an enemy in the future, he really had to be careful to avoid encountering similar attacks. Bai Lu glanced at him with a complicated expression and whispered, "Li Tai Bai, do you know why the Great Elder and the others gave you such preferential treatment?" Lu Yi was startled for a moment and then shook his head. He originally thought that it was because his formation disc helped the Merfolk clan survive the disaster, but from what Bai Lu said, it seemed that this wasn't the only reason. Bai Lu explained, "Our clan's ancestors once left behind a maxim that if you want to remove the curse, you have to do it in the temple. You are the first human to appear in the temple in so many years, so the Great Elder and the others feel that you are someone who is favored by the temple, and perhaps you have the ability to remove the curse for our clan." Chapter 1461. Although Bai Lu was the princess of the Merfolk clan, there was no doubt that she was not scheming, or perhaps she had a certain degree of trust in Lu Yi. Otherwise, it was impossible for her to directly explain this matter to Lu Yi. Only then did Lu Yi understand why the Merfolk clan's attitude towards him was so kind. Yen Miao had said similar words before, but it was not so in-depth. However, things like ancient proverbs were obviously unreliable. Lu Yi did not know how to help the Merfolk clan resolve the curse. At least he did not have the ability to do so now. Of course, if he did have the ability in the future, he would not mind helping the Merfolk clan. On this day, Lu Yi returned from weeding again. As usual, he urged the talent tree to devour fire attribute treasures to replenish the fuel reserves. He chatted casually with Bai Lu. He took out the azure sea snail and poured his spiritual power into it. Every time he returned to the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi would try it. As a result, the azure sea snail had not moved since the last time he opened the door. Unexpectedly, the azure sea snail actually reacted this time. Lu Yi was startled and quickly put it to his mouth, puffed up his cheeks and blew on it. Bai Lu obviously sensed it and quickly closed her mouth, staring at the azure sea snail. As Lu Yi poured his spiritual power into it, the sound of the conch rang out, and a green light began to flicker and condense. Until a certain moment, the green light swept out and spread out in front of Lu Yi, turning into a door. "This is the door to the Celestial Sea Snail Hall?" Bai Lu asked in surprise. Lu Yi nodded, got up and said, "I'll send you back." Bai Lu was obviously a little reluctant, but considering that she had come here alone for several days, it was indeed time to go back, so she could only obediently follow. The two passed through the door one after another, and when they reappeared, they were indeed outside the Celestial Sea Snail Hall. Looking around, Bai Lu smiled, "Li Tai Bai, if you want to come to my clan's territory again in the future, remember to look for me when you come back." Lu Yi said, "This door can't be maintained for too long. I need you to help explain the situation to the Queen and the Grand Elder." Of course. Bai Lu did not refuse. It was indeed necessary to inform the Grand Elder in advance to avoid any misunderstandings. "Then I'll go back first." Lu Yi said so, turned around and stepped into the door. "You." Bai Lu had just opened her mouth when Lu Yi disappeared without a trace. She could not help but slap the ground with her fishtail. After Lu Ye's figure disappeared, the door also disappeared. When he returned to the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi also noticed that the portal had disappeared. This time the portal did not last as long as last time. Last time he had waited outside the Celestial Spiral Hall for a while. This time he did not linger and returned directly. From the looks of it, the portal would disappear when he returned, no matter how long it had been there. Calculating the time, it should have been about 7 days since the last time he used the Azure Sea Snail to open the door. Perhaps 7 days was the interval between using the Azure Sea Conch's power. Of course, this was just a guess. He had tried it too few times, so he couldn't be sure. He would know the answer the next time he used it. He tried to activate the power of the Azure Sea Snail, but there was no reaction. Lu Yi continued to remove the weeds. In the process of removing the weeds, he would often find scallops, conches, and the like among the seaweed. He collected all of them. However, because the number of storage rings in his hand was limited, and most of them contained things like spirit jades and spirit crystals, Lu Yi could only pile up the seaweed in a corner of the Constellation Hall. Now the seaweed had piled up into a small hill. Every 7 days, Lu Yi would try to activate the power of the Azure Sea Snail, and found that it was as he had judged before. After using this thing once, it indeed needed to wait 7 days before it could be used again. He did not know the principle behind this. Lu Yi thought that this thing did not need to be blown, and that it could be used directly by injecting spiritual power. However, after trying it, he found that if he wanted to use it, he had to blow it. It was very strange. He also figured out the function of the Azure Sea Snail's imprint. The imprint was equivalent to a positioning. If Lu Yi left the imprint of the Azure Sea Snail somewhere in advance, then after using its power to open the door, the position of the door would appear at the imprint. If there was no imprint, then it would appear outside the Heavenly Sea Snail Hall in the Merfolk territory. After all, this thing was brought out from the Heavenly Sea Snail Hall, so it was not difficult to understand this connection. Overall, the Azure Sea Snail was a good treasure. If it could really allow Lu Yi to directly enter the Merfolk territory from the Wanxiang Sea, then he would be able to open up a path of wealth that belonged to him alone. Moreover, he could use it to travel. If he left an imprint somewhere in advance, then when he wanted to return, he could just activate the power of the Azure Sea Snail. On the other hand, if he wanted to use it to escape, it was somewhat unrealistic because activating this treasure required some time, and he also needed to blow it. If he was really chased by a powerhouse, this thing would not be of much use. In the time it took to activate it, Lu Yi would have already run far away. The only problem now was that Lu Yi did not know how far the Azure Sea Snail could open the door. If it was not far enough, then it would be useless. There was no way to test it, so he could only slowly explore it in the future. Looking at the pitch-black stone tablet in the center of the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi was filled with helplessness. Calculating the time, the ranking battle in the Constellation Hall was probably coming to an end, and he was only halfway done with weeding. He would not be able to make it in time for the ranking battle. Was a pity. In Hall 1863, Chu Shen was also looking at the ranking. At the same time, he was holding his musical note in his hand, trying to contact Lu Yi. He had already done this many days ago, but no matter how he tried, the message could not be sent out. Now, there was only a few days left before the Constellation Hall closed. In the last few days, he still could not contact him. What is Boss Fa doing? Chu Shen frowned, puzzled. The Constellation Hall ranking was such a big event that no Constellation Realm cultivator would be willing to miss it. Because missing it was equivalent to missing out on an opportunity, which was related to one's future in the upper realm. But ever since he parted ways with Fa Wuzuan at the auction, Chu Shen had not seen him again. He could be sure that Boss Fa was still alive because his name was still on the ranking. If someone died, their name would disappear. But since he was alive, why didn't he participate in the ranking battle? He could not say that he was trapped in some competition and could not escape, right? This had never happened before. According to Chu Shen's judgment, Fa Wuzuan's personal strength was at least in the top 10 of the ranking, or even higher. This was a great advantage. But in reality, Fa Wuzuan's ranking had almost fallen out of the ranking. Because every time someone challenged him, if he did not accept the challenge within a certain time limit, he would be disqualified and his ranking would be reduced. At first, no one challenged Fa Wuzuan, because many people had seen his strength with their own eyes and knew how strong he was. Even if they challenged him, they did not stand a chance. But as Fa Wuzuan's ranking kept falling, more and more people challenged him. This caused Fa Wuzuan's ranking to fall very quickly. When Chu Shen looked at the ranking again, Fa Wuzuan's name was no longer on the ranking. He could not help but sigh. Since he was young, there were not many people he admired. Fa Wuzuan was one of them. He also knew that Boss Fa was tyrannical, so he really did not want to see his name being squeezed out of the ranking. In a moment of anger, he could not help but challenge a cultivator at the bottom of the ranking. Not long after, he came back with a bloody nose and a swollen face. With his early constellation cultivation, he was still at a disadvantage against a veteran late constellation cultivator. If it was not for his extraordinary treasures, he would have been killed. Boss Fa, where are you? Chu Shen looked up at the sky and sighed. He only felt that there was no hero on the ranking, so many people became famous. Along with Chu Shen, Little Dumb, Crooked Tooth, Caillou, and Kai Xing were also concerned about Fa Wuzuan's ranking. The four girls had benefited greatly from following Lu Yi in the chaotic assembly, so they naturally cared more about him. Moreover, they all had Lu Ye's musical imprint, so they had tried to contact Lu Yi, but it did not go as they wished. After a few more days, the constellation hall suddenly shook, and the ranking shone brightly. The names imprinted on the ranking seemed to come to life, flying out one after another. In the next instant, these names were imprinted in the void according to the ranking on the ranking. It was as if there was a grand and vast voice echoing throughout the entire Wanxiang galaxy. Countless cultivators turned their heads to look. No matter where they were, no matter how far away they were from the constellation hall, as long as they looked in this direction, they could clearly see the huge ranking imprinted in the void. On that ranking, the names of the people were shining brightly. Another generation of powerful Yuyao was about to be born. Almost every cultivator who left their name on the Constellation Hall's ranking would have strength that surpassed ordinary cultivators after advancing to Yuyao. Putting aside those cultivators with extraordinary backgrounds for the time being, they naturally already had a home. However, those cultivators with mediocre backgrounds were undoubtedly the targets that all the major forces fought to recruit. When the ranking imprinted in the void, the door of the Constellation Hall, which had been open all this time, slowly closed. The millions of cultivators in the Constellation Hall were all enveloped by an inexplicable force. When they regained their senses, they were already in a certain location in the Wanxiang galaxy. This location was not fixed. This was because when the Constellation Hall closed, if the cultivators were still inside, the Constellation Hall would casually toss them somewhere. At this moment, from the outside, the Constellation Hall seemed both real and illusory. Just like before, it stood tall in the depths of the galaxy, appearing mysterious and unfathomable. Inside the real Constellation Hall, Lu Yi stared at the pitch-black stone tablet in the center of the hall. Ever since he had arrived here, the stone tablet had not reacted at all. Until just now, many names had suddenly appeared. Lu Yi saw many familiar names. Without a doubt, they were all people who had left their names on the ranking before. Originally, he should have been one of them. Unfortunately, his name could no longer be seen. Lu Yi was not surprised by this result. He was still in the same place, but those people outside would not pity him. It was only a matter of time before he fell out of the ranking. Chapter 1462. After looking carefully, Lu Yi found Pu Ke's name in the 112th position. Lu Yi was not surprised by this result. Pu Ke looked like a sloppy person who did not do anything serious all day. Besides drinking, fishing, and looking at women, Lu Yi knew that his strength was not to be underestimated after their last cooperation. Therefore, even though he looked like he had nothing to do all day, he did not neglect his work. The knot in Lu Ye's heart dissipated slightly. He was not on the list, so seeing his friend on the list was a consolation. Looking further down, he saw Spectre in the 200th position. It was obviously not easy for a ghost cultivator to rank so high in such a competition. After all, ghost cultivators were best at hiding and killing. Lu Yi did not know the rules of the ranking battle, but no matter what the rules were, they were disadvantageous to ghost cultivators. This was because both those who challenged Spectre and those who were challenged by Spectre knew that their opponent was a ghost cultivator. Once they were on guard, it would not be easy for Spectre to succeed. Therefore, even though Spectre's ranking was lower than Pu Ke's in terms of threat, she was much higher than Pu Ke. Looking further down, Lu Yi did not recognize anyone else. Even though he had been in the Wanxiang galaxy for a long time, he had not come into contact with many people. It was undeniable that these people who left their names on the ranking list would have great achievements in the future. Moreover, their chances of advancing to Yuyao were much higher than the other constellations. Generally speaking, the probability of advancing to Yuyao among the constellations who left their names on the ranking list was 90%. This probability was extremely terrifying. There were so many constellations in the various galaxies, but how many of them could advance to Yuyao? Under normal circumstances, it was probably less than 5%. In comparison, a 90% probability was very realistic. These people would have a chance to enter the Constellation Hall to advance to Yuyao at any time. There was no time limit. As long as the cultivator was prepared, they could enter the Constellation Hall and break through to the upper realm under the mysterious cover of the Constellation Hall. Perhaps some people had already started doing this. Lu Yi remembered that he had met a guy called Wei Jian. He should have stayed in the late stage of the Constellation Hall for a long time, waiting for the Constellation Hall to open so that he could get a ranking and help himself advance. There would definitely be many people like Wei Jian in those top realms and galaxies. Unfortunately, none of this had anything to do with Lu Yi. He spent his days either weeding or replenishing fuel for his talent tree. There was no need to continue experimenting with the effects of the Azure Sea Snail. It was certain that it could only be used once every 7 days. Lu Yi now wanted to know how long the mark he left in the Constellation Hall could last. Since the last time he left this mark he had not removed it. Up until now this mark still remained. However, Lu Yi could feel that this mark was dissipating, albeit at a very slow speed. At this rate, Lu Yi estimated that the mark would last for at least a year or two. This was good because if the imprint dissipated too quickly, it wouldn't be of much use. Just like that, another month passed. During this month, Bai Lu came to look for him once more. It wasn't anything special, she just wanted to take a look. In the past, the Merfolk clan had nowhere else to go other than around their own territory. Now that there was an additional constellation hall, they naturally wanted to visit more often. Unfortunately, the road wasn't too peaceful, so Bai Lu couldn't come too often. Bai Lu stayed here for 2 days before she was sent back by Lu Yi using the Azure Sea Snail's power. She was rather unhappy when she left. On this day, Lu Yi was weeding the constellation hall when he suddenly felt something strange in his body. He calmed his mind and hurriedly returned to the hall. He sat down cross-legged and silently circulated his mysterious art. He sensed that there were specks of golden light in his bone marrow. Each speck of golden light was the condensation of his essence qi, as if it was radiating with new vitality. Lu Yi even felt that his bones were a little numb and itchy. This process didn't last long. When the strange feeling in his body disappeared, Lu Yi only felt that the speed of the spiritual power in his body had increased by a notch. Lu Yi could vaguely sense that his strength had increased by quite a bit. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Late-stage Constellation Hall. Calculating the time, it had only been a year and a half since he came to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Advancing to the middle-stage Constellation Hall was precisely the time he came to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. A year and a half to advance from the middle-stage Constellation Hall to the late stage. If this news were to spread, it would probably shock everyone to the extreme. To anyone, advancing in the constellation realm was a gradual process of accumulation and consolidation over time. No matter how fast one's cultivation speed was, it couldn't be this fast. However, Lu Yi had previously cultivated in the waters of the 10,000 Elephant Sea when he was fishing. For the past 2 months, he had spent most of his time in the 10,000 Elephant Sea's waters. He had no choice but to maintain a super-efficient cultivation state. Lu Yi couldn't be sure if this kind of cultivation efficiency would be unmatched in the future, but it was definitely unprecedented. That was why he was able to break through another minor realm in a year and a half. But this wasn't what he wanted. For cultivators, cultivating slowly wasn't a good thing. However, for him to cultivate too quickly wasn't a good thing either. Because the time between each advancement was too short, he didn't have the time to stabilize himself. Fortunately, he'd participated in the battle for the Constellation Hall and fought against many Constellation Realm cultivators. He'd even killed a weakened Yu Yao with Pu Ku and Spectre. Otherwise, his advancement now would definitely cause his foundation to be unstable. Now that he sensed it, there wasn't much of a problem. However, Lu Yi knew that he had to control his cultivation speed and slow it down a little. Otherwise, advancing to Yu Yao in the future would definitely be a huge challenge. He carefully sensed his state after his advancement. After confirming that there weren't too many hidden dangers, he finally relaxed. Cultivation in the constellation realm was the tempering of one's essence. In the early stages, it was the essence of the flesh and blood. In the middle stages, it was the essence of the marrow. Now that he was at the late stages, it was the essence of the organs. For Lu Yi now, it wasn't difficult for him to regrow a severed arm. Because the essence of his flesh and blood and marrow had been tempered to the extreme, he had the ability to regrow a severed arm. Of course, he would have to pay a huge price and spend a lot of time. Therefore, even if a constellation realm cultivator at this level had the ability to regrow a severed arm, he wouldn't easily take such a risk. When the essence of the organs was tempered to the extreme, it was a kind of sublimation of the cultivator's essence from the inside out. His vitality would also be greatly strengthened. At this level, no matter how serious his injuries were, as long as he still had a breath left, he could recover. Lu Yi sighed as he checked his fire-type treasures and the reserves of fuel for his talent tree. He was able to advance to the late stages of the constellation realm so quickly because of the pile of spiritual jades. He had spent more than 10 million spiritual jades to buy fire-type treasures in Hall 88. Now there wasn't much left. However, according to his estimation, it should be enough to last until he finished removing all the seaweeds in the Constellation Hall. Thinking of this, Lu Yi was shocked. Was this a coincidence? If he had bought less or not bought at all back then, he wouldn't have been able to go deep into the Wanxiang Sea. Naturally, he wouldn't have been able to help the Constellation Hall remove the seaweeds. Why was it so coincidental that he bought fire-type treasures that were just about enough? However, if it wasn't a coincidence, it couldn't be that the will of the Constellation Hall was secretly influencing his decision. Thinking back carefully to his state of mind when he decided to buy fire-type treasures, Lu Yi remembered that he hesitated for a moment. Because buying things from Hall 88 was more expensive than buying them from the Wanxiangxi. At that time he considered that he had so many spiritual jades on hand, and Hall 88 had ample resources, so it was convenient to buy things. Therefore he didn't consider the issue of price. However, now that he thought about it, no matter how many spiritual jades he had, he must have spent more than 1 million spiritual jades to buy things. This wasn't a small number. If he had to choose again now, he would definitely consider it carefully and wouldn't have made that decision so easily. Was it the will of the Constellation Hall that interfered with his judgment and decision? Lu Yi couldn't tell anymore. Moreover, it seemed meaningless to investigate this now. After resting for a while, Lu Yi continued to remove the seaweeds. Originally, after a cultivator had broken through, it was best to spend some time to stabilize their cultivation and familiarize themselves with their increased strength. However, Lu Yi didn't need to do that. He went deep into the Wanxiangxi to passively stabilize his cultivation, and the efficiency was especially high. When he looked inside himself, an enormous amount of pure energy surged into his body, urging the condensation of his essence qi and turning it into specks of golden light in his organs. A few days passed like this. When Lu Yi cleared the last piece of seaweed on the outer walls of the Constellation Hall, the entire Constellation Hall shook loudly. It was the same situation he encountered when he was removing the seaweed for the first time. However, the shaking this time was obviously longer than last time. It was like a person who had taken a comfortable bath after being sloppy for a long time. Lu Yi was still a little apprehensive. Helping the Constellation Hall to remove the seaweed was his own guess. He couldn't be sure whether the Constellation Hall had brought him here for this or not. Now that he had finished removing the seaweed, it would be a tragedy if he found out that everything he did was useless. The fire-type treasures he bought were all used up, and there wasn't much fuel left in the talent tree. He couldn't stay in the sea for too long. Lu Yi turned around and returned to the Constellation Hall. However, as soon as he stepped into the Constellation Hall, his gaze was attracted by something. Apart from the pitch-black stone tablet, there was only the seaweed Lu Yi had piled up in the corner of the Constellation Hall. However, there was something else this time. No, there were two things. Lu Yi hurriedly went forward and activated his spirit energy to protect his body as he took a closer look. At first glance he was greatly surprised, because one of the things was a small hall about the size of a palm. In terms of appearance, it was exactly the same as the Constellation Hall. What was this? Did the Constellation Hall give birth? Lu Yi used his divine telekinesis and didn't find anything strange, but he knew that his previous guess was probably right. Chapter 1463. The Constellation Hall had sent him here to weed out its weeds. Now that he had completed his mission, this was probably the reward that the Constellation Hall had given him. There were rewards for ranking in the rankings. The most basic reward was a chance to enter the Constellation Hall to promote Yu Yao at any time. The higher one's ranking was, the longer one could stay in the Constellation Hall. Apart from that, there were also special rewards for being in the top 10. Lu Yi had missed the ranking battle and did not get any ranking. However, if the Azure Sea Snail could continue to work, he could enter the Constellation Hall whenever he wanted in the future. Moreover, he would enter the Constellation Hall's main hall, unlike other cultivators who only entered the Constellation Hall's projection. Therefore, from this point alone, he did not lose much by not being able to participate in the ranking battle. Now that the Constellation Hall had given him a special reward, he seemed to have profited. However, he did not know what this small Constellation Hall was for. He hurriedly stepped forward and picked up the Constellation Hall that had shrunk countless times. It was slightly heavy in his hand, but upon closer inspection, he did not find anything special about it. He tried to channel his spiritual power, but he could not channel it. This minor Constellation Hall did not seem to be able to accept his spiritual power. He also could not sense anything special about it with his divine sense. Lu Yi could not help but frown. This thing, what is it for? He was sure that since it was a treasure given by the Constellation Hall, it was definitely not something useless. It was definitely a treasure. However, he could not figure out its use for the time being. After fumbling around for a while, Lu Yi still could not figure it out. He put it away. It would not be too late to try it again in the future. Lu Yi looked at the second item. This item was placed beside the minor Constellation Hall. It was a very small knife about the length of a finger. When Lu Yi first looked at it, he actually did not notice it. He reached out and picked it up. It was bone-chilling to the touch. He used his spiritual power to isolate it, and only then did he feel better. Is this a spiritual treasure? Or a Dharma treasure? It doesn't look like one. Lu Yi tried to channel his spiritual power into the knife. This time the knife did not reject him. However, there was no reaction from the knife itself. Lu Yi also could not detect any traces of restrictions. If there were no restrictions, then it was not a spiritual treasure or Dharma treasure. Could it be a rare treasure? If this thing was a rare treasure and was bestowed by the Constellation Hall, it would definitely have a terrifying killing power. However, this thing was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much energy Lu Yi poured into it, it was all sucked in, and there was still no reaction. Why were the two treasures bestowed by the Constellation Hall so strange? Lu Yi knew that even if he asked the Constellation Hall, he would not get an answer. Although this Starry Sky Supreme Treasure had its own will, it had never communicated with him. With a thought, he prepared to carefully examine the small knife. However, as soon as his divine sense entered the knife, Lu Ye's expression changed drastically. His body instinctively floated backward, unsheathing the Panshan saber and slashing forward. Because in his field of vision, a blurry figure strangely appeared. The figure seemed to be holding a saber in his hand, and casually swung it at him. The light of the sun exploded, and a lotus flower slowly bloomed. In this great danger, Lu Yi used his strongest saber technique right from the start. When the lotus flower dissipated, Lu Yi was still in the posture of drawing his saber, gasping for breath. His clothes were soaked in sweat, and his eyes were filled with lingering fear. There was a slight tingling in his mind. This was the result of his divine sense being cut off. It was not serious, and he would recover after resting for a while. There was no one in front of him at all. It was as if what he saw earlier was just an illusion. However, Lu Yi knew that it was not an illusion. He really saw it. That strange scene was very real. Furthermore, the blurry figure's saber technique was much stronger than his. His lotus flower could not withstand a single blow from the other party. This was not a difference in cultivation but the difference in their saber techniques. In his mind, Lu Yi kept recalling the saber light from earlier, and he gained some understanding. Taking a deep breath, Lu Yi sheathed his saber and looked at the small knife in his hand, slowly revealing a joyful expression. He did not understand what the Constellation Hall was for, but he had a rough idea of what this small knife was. This thing was actually an inheritance. In essence, it was the same as the Tyrant Saber Art inheritance that Xiaoqin obtained in the Soaring Dragon Realm's secret realm. However, the Tyrant Saber Art inheritance was a piece of black stone, while this inheritance was a small knife. Furthermore, in terms of level, this inheritance was much stronger than the Tyrant Saber Art. After all, it was given by the Constellation Hall. How could its level not be high? This was like someone delivering a pillow to Xiaoqin just as he was about to doze off. After being forced to advance to the late-stage Constellation Hall, Lu Yi would have to slow down his cultivation for a while. Originally, he planned to use this time to think of ways to improve his saber techniques. His saber techniques basically came from the Tyrant Saber Art. What he obtained was not just the 3 Tyrant Saber moves. The inheritance of the Tyrant Saber was complete, a complete system. When Xiaoqin fought, even if he did not execute the 3 Tyrant Saber moves, every saber strike was an extension and expansion of the Tyrant Saber Art. It was his own comprehension and understanding of the Tyrant Saber Art. Because the concept of the Tyrant Saber Art was extremely compatible with his own fighting style, he would give his enemies an extremely aggressive and unreasonable feeling when fighting. Coupled with his deep and solid foundation, he would often be able to defeat those who were stronger than him and fight those who were of a higher level than him. However, the Tyrant Saber Art was an inheritance that he had obtained from the Soaring Dragon Realm's secret realm. For now, it would not be a problem in a fight at the Constellation Realm. However, Lu Yi did not know if he would still be able to do so after advancing to Yu Yao. Especially if he encountered an opponent who could restrain the Tyrant Saber Art, then he would definitely be restrained. Naturally, he had to plan ahead. Based on his cultivation speed, it would probably not take him many years to advance to Yu Yao. However, it was not easy to improve one's saber technique. The 9 states had just connected with the starry sky and did not have a strong background to rely on. There were many powerful cultivators who used sabers in the Wanxiangxi, but none of them were related to Lu Yi, so why would they teach him? Lu Yi originally wanted to see if he could find a way to buy some saber technique inheritance treasures from the 10,000 Elephant Chamber of Commerce, even if he had to pay a huge price. However, he did not expect that the Constellation Hall would directly bestow it upon him. From this, it could be seen that the will of the Constellation Hall was not completely unconcerned about him. Thus, it knew what he was currently lacking, and thus decided to bestow it upon him. Thinking back to the saber strike that had struck him, Lu Yi became excited. It was completely different from the concept of the tyrant saber art. The saber strike from the blurry figure was extremely graceful and had benefited Lu Yi greatly. He could feel that if he could comprehend this inheritance, then his saber techniques would definitely improve greatly. Just as he was about to try again, Lu Yi's body suddenly tightened. A strange pressure came from all directions, as if an invisible hand had pinched him. Lu Yi was slightly startled, but he quickly realized what was happening. He had completed his mission here, and the Constellation Hall had also bestowed him with a reward. They were sending him away. Lu Yi bowed slightly in greeting. Although the Constellation Hall had caused him to miss out on the ranking battle, he had still received all the benefits he deserved. At most he had only worked as a laborer for 2 months. This was something that Lu Yi could still accept. Moreover, in comparison he had received even more. In the next instant, Lu Yi felt the world spin and he could not see anything. When he came back to his senses, he had already appeared in the starry sky. He looked around and saw a huge ocean in the distance. It was the Wanxiang Sea. He had returned to the Wanxiang Galaxy. Where should he go? Lu Yi pondered for a moment. In the vast Wanxiang Galaxy he was only a passerby. There was no place for him to go. After thinking about it, Lu Yi decided to test whether the Azure Sea Conk's power could still be activated. If it could, then he could return to the Constellation Hall at any time in the future. The Constellation Hall still had the conch mark he had left behind, and this test was also related to whether he could open up a path of wealth that belonged to him alone. It was not easy to test it here. After the Azure Sea Conk's power was activated, it would leave a door behind. Therefore he had to find a remote place with no one around. Looking around, Lu Yi saw a small dead star not far away. He flashed over there. Spiritual power fluctuations came from not far away. There should be cultivators approaching. Lu Yi turned his head to size them up and found that there were quite a number of them. There were as many as 6 of them. But the strange thing was that the spiritual power fluctuations from these 6 people were all at the early stage of the Constellation Hall. After taking a closer look, Lu Yi's expression became even weirder, because he found that he knew the leader. Chu Xin. What a coincidence. He did not expect to meet this guy when he just returned from the Constellation Hall. However, Chu Xin knew Fa Wuzuan, but he had no friendship with Li Taibai. Moreover, this guy was the young master of Chailing Circle. He had a strong man in Sunshine State behind him. Now he brought a group of subordinates to do something. But after taking a closer look, Lu Yi's expression became even weirder. He thought that those who followed Chu Xin were his subordinates, but now it seemed that they were not. Because he actually knew all 5 of them. Dumbo, Crooked Teeth, the sisters Kai Xing and Kai Yu, and even the invincible Lucky Star were there. That was strange. How could these guys get together? Lu Yi could understand that Chu Shen and the invincible Lucky Star were connected. After all, they had cooperated together before. Perhaps they had left their musical notes at that time. But Dumbo and the others obviously did not know Chu Shen. At this moment, 5 beauties with different temperaments followed behind Chu Shen. Chu Shen, who took the lead, had a complacent look on his face. No one knew what happy thing he had encountered. Anyway, he looked very happy. This kind of happiness was even happier after seeing Lu Yi. Chu Shen stared at Lu Yi for a while and shouted, "Good, I've searched high and low for you, only to find you without any effort. I finally found you." Lu Yi was stunned for a moment. He did not know why he was looking for him. Anyway, Li Taibai had no friendship with Chu Shen. Instead, they seemed to have some conflicts. This guy once ran away from home. It was Li Taibai who caught him and earned a reward of 100,000 spiritual jades. Then Lu Yi heard Chu Shen shout in a low voice, "Formation." Chapter 1464. When Chu Shen finished his words, Dumbo immediately took out a formation plate connected with Qi and Qi. As if it had been practiced countless times, the Qi dynamic of the 6 figures was connected instantly. As the spiritual power surged, a huge Xuanwu appeared out of thin air. Chu Shen was the head, occupying Lu Yi's original position. The left and right forelimbs of Black Tortoise were still Caixing and Kaiwei, followed by Dumbo and Crooked Teeth, and the tail was Lucky Star. The formation of 6 people was undoubtedly more solid than the formation of 5 people. Lu Yi's eyes twitched. He never thought that he would be antagonized by his former companions as soon as he returned to Vientiane Galaxy, and they even used the Tongqi-connected formation disc he sold. Although the formation disc was precious, there were not many of them and it was not widely available. But it was not difficult for Chu Shen to get a formation disc with his identity here. Chu Shen laughed and said, "I told you last time that I would get back at you sooner or later, but you didn't believe me. Boy, it's not too late for you to admit your mistake and apologize, or I will beat you into a pig head." Obviously, he still remembered that he was captured by Lu Yi and brought back to Chailing's circle last time. Now he felt that he had the strength to get back at him, so he didn't hesitate. He didn't want to kill Lu Yi, and there was no deep hatred. He just happened to meet Lu Yi and wanted to teach him a lesson. Lu Yi just looked at him expressionlessly as if he didn't hear his words. Chu Shen was impatient and waved his hand. "Beat him." The six of them formed a formation. Although they were only at the early stage of Constellation, the Black Tortoise formation was inclined to defense, so they could fight even if they met someone at the early stage of Constellation. What's more, Chu Shen knew that the guy in front of him was not at the early stage of Constellation, but at the middle stage of Constellation. When he was captured, he fought with Lu Yi. With Chu Shen's order, the left and right forelimbs of the Black Tortoise formation waved fiercely, and two sword rivers swept over and merged into one in the middle. Looking at the posture, it was like a giant sword in Black Tortoise's mouth. The sword river rotated and rolled forward, like a sword dragon attacking. Such power was really extraordinary, absolutely comparable to a cultivator at the middle stage of Constellation. Lu Yi just stood there quietly as if she was scared silly. Seeing that the sword dragon was about to attack, Chu Shen hesitated. He didn't want to kill Lu Yi. He just wanted to teach him a lesson and resolve the knot in his heart. However, he didn't expect that this guy who was so fierce when he fought him alone, would be so weak now. Instinctively, he controlled the formation to shift slightly to the side, and the giant sword in the Black Tortoise's mouth also shifted its target. Then he saw Lu Ye's figure move, completely ignoring him. Instead, he brushed past Black Tortoise's figure and headed straight for the rear. "In your dreams." Chu Shen was furious and immediately understood Lu Ye's plan. Obviously, Lu Yi was aiming at Dumbo, who had activated the power of the formation plate. Once an array was formed, it was indeed powerful. However, if the array disk was destroyed, then the array would collapse on its own. How could Chu Shen allow such a thing to happen? The disk array in his hand was something he had painstakingly begged his mother for. Before the galaxy could mass-produce it, it would not be so easy to find a second one. Chu Shen was also a genius. Even if he didn't have rich experience in fighting, his fighting instinct was extremely terrifying. After seeing through Lu Ye's plan, he immediately shook his body and led the formation to move. He wanted to let Dumbo avoid Lu Ye's attack. At the same time, the sword dragon chased after Lu Yi. Not only that, the defense of the Black Tortoise formation was also exerted. A large amount of spiritual power was mobilized and gathered at the place where Dumbo was, turning into a protective force. However, his fighting instinct was amazing. Lu Yi also came here through wind and rain. No matter how Chu Shen controlled the formation, he still arrived at the place where Dumbo was accurately. The mountain knife was unsheathed, and the knife light was like snow. Dumbo couldn't help being frightened. Anyone who felt this kind of threat at a close distance would have an instinctive fear. The light flashed. The mountain knife stabbed 3 feet in front of Dumbo, but it was blocked by an invisible protective force. The sword dragon had already arrived. However, Chu Shen was slightly shocked and felt something was wrong, because he suddenly found that the guy named Li Taibai actually promoted to the late constellation stage. The Black Tortoise formation formed by the 6 early constellation stage could deal with a middle constellation stage easily. It was not impossible to deal with a late constellation stage, but it might be a hard fight. When he was about to turn around to fight back, he suddenly found that the spiritual power of the Black Tortoise formation was greatly consumed, and the source of the spiritual power consumption was the place where Li Taibai attacked. Chu Shen was shocked. He never thought that Li Taibai's knife had such terrifying power. The sword dragon attacked. Lu Yi was about to dodge, but the tail of the Black Tortoise suddenly swept over. At the tail, Lucky Star's 10 fingernails grew crazily, and her aura became extremely manic, as if she had been injected with chicken blood. She rushed to Lu Yi as if she had some irreconcilable hatred with Lu Yi. Having cooperated with Lucky Star, Lu Yi naturally knew that this woman looked delicate and soft on the surface, but once she fought, she was just like a madman. She would do anything and didn't care about her own life at all. Lu Yi turned around and chopped at the sword dragon. When Caixing and Caiyue's faces changed, the sword dragon had been broken. Lu Yi kicked out again, aiming for Lucky Star's abdomen. She wanted to kick her back, but Lucky Star didn't move at all. She took Lu Ye's powerful kick head-on. Then she waved her hands and pounced on Lu Yi. "Well done. Chu Shen was overjoyed. A treasure mirror suddenly appeared in his hand. When the spiritual power was activated, the treasure mirror shot a mysterious light toward Lu Yi, who was fighting with Lucky Star. Lu Yi knew the power of the body solidifying mirror, but with the talent tree, Lu Yi wasn't afraid of the mirror's solidifying effect, so he didn't dodge at all. Not only did he not dodge, but he also restrained Lucky Star, who wanted to dodge. The mysterious light of the treasure mirror hit Lu Yi and Lucky Star. Lu Yi was safe and sound, but Lucky Star's body was stiff. Chu Shen secretly said that it was bad. Lu Yi had kicked Lucky Star back, and the long saber in his hand stabbed at Dumbo again. Chu Shen hurriedly controlled the formation to dodge. The whole black tortoise formation seemed to be alive under his control and became extremely agile. However, no matter how he controlled it, he couldn't get rid of Lu Ye's attack. What made him more frightened was that even the protection of the black tortoise formation seemed to be unable to resist. The sword dragon of Caixing and Kaiwei rotated again. However, before the sword dragon attacked, the protection of the black tortoise formation had been broken. The mountain saber stabbed at Dumbo, making her pale. With a crack, Dumbo didn't feel any pain, but the formation plate in her hands was broken. The huge black tortoise suddenly collapsed. The closely connected chi dynamic of several people was immediately cut off. A treasure appeared in Chu Shen's hand, which looked like a big seal. No one knew what was so mysterious about it. However, as soon as the treasure was taken out, he was stiff all over and didn't dare to move. Only his eyeballs were rolling. A long black saber was put on his neck without him knowing. The cold blade made his skin feel cold. On the side, the 5 women stared at this scene blankly. Their eyes were complicated. No one expected that their black tortoise formation was broken like this. Although the confrontation was short, everyone felt the horror and power of Lu Yi. Such a person was definitely not an ordinary person at the late stage of Constellation. "Who did you say you want to beat into a pig's head?" Lu Yi asked lightly. Chu Shen laughed and looked very embarrassed. He said, "Taoist fellow apprentice, you misunderstood me. I didn't say I want to beat into a pig's head. I'm just happy to see you, Taoist fellow apprentice, so I came to say hello to you." Chu Shen didn't understand why he fell for the same person twice. He thought he could take revenge, but who knew that the other person actually advanced to the late stage of Constellation? This was unreasonable. "So it's just a greeting." Lu Yi nodded slightly. He didn't want to do anything to Chu Shen. No matter what, Chu Shen helped a lot during the auction. However, Li Taibai and Chu Shen didn't have any relationship, so it wasn't right to let him go just like that. Moreover, Chu Shen's personality was too reckless. It might be a blessing to let him suffer a little. "Tell me, how do you want to settle this matter?" When Lu Yi spoke, his gaze wandered between Chu Shen's arms and legs, as if he wanted to choose one to chop off. Chu Shen felt Lu Ye's hostility and felt a chill in his heart. He knew that he couldn't be kind today, so he straightened his neck. "Taoist fellow apprentice, do you know who I am?" Lu Yi looked at him indifferently. "The young master of the Carbell world, the descendant of a sunshine powerhouse." Chu Shen curled his lips. "My mother said that I can't use her name to do things in the future, so I have nothing to do with the Carbell world." Lu Yi raised his eyebrows. "So it doesn't matter if I kill you here?" Chu Shen snorted. "Try it if you have the guts. I'm not afraid to tell you that I'm Fa Wuzuan's little brother. Fa Wuzuan is my big brother. If you dare to touch me, the Pharaoh Assembly will come to settle accounts with you, and it will be 10 times more." Lu Ye's eyes twitched and his expression was strange. "Fa Wuzuan is your big brother?" "Yes." Chu Shen was proud. He pointed at Xiao Dai and the others. "Do you see them? If you've seen the Chaos Assembly, you should recognize them. They fought side by side with my big brother at that time. They are my big brother's confidants. He had an agreement with Jiao Yan that he couldn't use her name to do things in the future. If he violated it, Jiao Yan would immediately take him back to the Carbell world. Since he couldn't use his mother's name, it didn't matter if he used his big brother Fa Wuzuan's name, right? This didn't count as violating the agreement with Jiao Yan. Also, my big brother organized an auction last time, and I helped him host that auction. Hundreds of millions of spirit jades passed through his hands. My big brother thinks very highly of me, so if you dare to touch me, my big brother will definitely not let you off. If you don't believe me, you can ask around." Chapter 1465. Chu Shen bragged, which made Lu Yi frown. How did Dumbo and the others become his confidants? Seeing that Lu Yi did not speak, Chu Shen even thought that Fa Wuzuan's name had frightened him, so he earnestly advised, "My big brother is a rare genius. With only the cultivation of constellation middle stage, he killed until the chaotic war association flowed with rivers of blood. Even an expert like Zhou Yuchuan was not his opponent. If it wasn't for the fact that he was delayed by something important, seizing the first place in the rankings would be a cinch. Taoist brother, it's better to squash enmity than keep it alive. This time Chu Shen lost. You can kill me or cut me, but they have nothing to do with this. Please let them go. He looked like a hoodlum, but he was righteous. Lu Yi didn't want to kill him or cut him. He just wanted to teach him a lesson. Now he didn't want to. He put away the Panshan saber and waved his hand. You can go. Chu Shen looked happy and secretly thought that the name of Boss Fa was really useful. He immediately winked at Dumbo and the others, stepped back a few steps and made a fist and palm salute. Thank you, Taoist brother. The mountains will not change and the rivers will flow forever. See you again someday. Before he finished his words, Lu Yi had already rushed to the distance. Since the battle ended, the girls had been on guard against Lu Yi. Only Dumbo kept looking at him up and down. Seeing Lu Yi was about to leave, she suddenly shouted, Taoist brother? Chu Shen was overjoyed and looked around. My big brother is here? Where is he? But he didn't see anything. Looking at Dumbo, he saw she was still staring at the direction Li Tai Bai left. Chu Shen frowned. Who are you calling? Dumbo said, don't you think his back looks like senior fellow apprentice Fa? And the style and way of fighting just now seemed to have a lot of similarities with senior fellow apprentice Fa. After all, she had followed Lu Yi to fight in the chaotic battle club. Dumbo usually looked dull, but her observation was very careful. If she hadn't said that, they wouldn't have thought about it. But after hearing what she said, when they looked at Lu Ye's back, they were shocked to find that he did indeed look very similar to Fa Wuzun. When they thought about how Lu Yi had attacked just now, they were all bewildered. Fa Wuzun was a saber cultivator and Lu Yi was also a saber cultivator. There were too many similarities. The corners of Chu Shen's eyes twitched. How could he be the pharaoh? Absolutely impossible. Suddenly he seemed to have thought of something. That's right, SPNX Lord is only in the middle stage of constellation, but this person is already in the late stage of constellation, so he's not SPNX Lord. Kai Xing said leisurely, cultivation can be promoted, and this person is so strong, he must be a master ranked at the top of the chips list. Judging from his performance just now, entering the top 30 is absolutely not a problem, but there doesn't seem to be such a person in the top 30. To be able to single-handedly break their formation in such a short period of time, how could an ordinary late-stage constellation realm cultivator possibly accomplish that? This was definitely an expert ranked at the top of the rankings. However, as far as they knew, the experts ranked at the top of the rankings were all in the Constellation Hall, preparing to break through to Yu Yao's realm. There was no reason for them to stay outside. Unless it was the kind of powerhouse who had such strength but was not on the rankings. There was only one such person, and that was Fa Wuzun, who did not participate in the ranking battle for some unknown reason. Ever since the auction, all the major forces had been searching for Fa Wuzun's whereabouts, trying to get information on him. They wanted to use him for their own purposes, but after the auction, Fa Wuzun seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Some people speculated that he had obtained hundreds of millions of spiritual jades and was afraid of being targeted by other powerhouses, so he left the Constellation Hall early and did not participate in the ranking battle. Many people agreed with this speculation. After all, ranking on the Constellation Hall's chips list was a great opportunity for Constellation Realm cultivators. No one would easily give it up unless they had no other choice. Fa Wuzun was a pseudonym. Anyone could see that his name was a pseudonym, so he must have disguised himself. His appearance was definitely not real. Therefore, although many superpowers were looking for Fa Wuzun, no one had found anything. If Dumbo and the others who had close contact with Fa Wuzun were not with Chu Shen, they would have been taken away by those superpowers for questioning. Although Jiao Yin didn't allow Chu Shen to use her name to do things outside, the relationship between Chu Shen and Jiao Yin couldn't be erased. By gathering these women by his side, Chu Shen had inadvertently helped them get rid of a troublesome situation. Otherwise, if they were brought in for questioning by the major powers, they wouldn't have had a good time. Chu Shen was still unwilling to believe it. He said resolutely, he is not Fa Lauda. Caillou was curious, how can you tell? Chu Shen said, I have known Fa Lauda for the longest time. I have seen his real appearance, so he can't be Fa Lauda. He swore so solemnly that the women no longer doubted it. There were many people in the world who had similar backs. If there was such a person who had a similar back as Fa Wuzun and was a weapon cultivator who used sabers, it was not strange. Let's go. Chu Shen called out and led them to fly towards the Wanxiang Sea. No one noticed that his fingers were trembling slightly. It was obvious that he was excited. Taking the lead to fly forward, he quietly took out his musical note and sent out a message. Lu Yi, who was flying towards the dead star, felt the vibration of the musical note. He took it out and found that it was a message from Chu Shen. "Big brother, you are back?" Lu Yi sighed slightly. "Chu Shen, this guy seems to be very smart. I'm afraid I've already been exposed to him." Lu Yi did not think that anyone could connect him with Fa Wuzuan, because no one had been in contact with Fa Wuzuan for too long. Even Ghost and Puku should not be able to tell. Because after participating in the chaotic battle, he specially bought a Crimson Dragon Saber to replace the Pan Shan Saber. In addition to his disguise, he could be said to be flawless in the Constellation realm. But Chu Shen was different. He had seen the Pan Shan Saber. When Lu Yi first cooperated with Chu Shen, he used the Pan Shan blade. Unrivaled Lucky Star was also there. However, when he put the blade against Chu Shen's neck, Unrivaled Lucky Star's back was facing Unrivaled Lucky Star. She probably didn't see the Pan Shan blade. Their figures were similar. They were both saber cultivators and their sabers looked the same. As long as Chu Shen was not too stupid, he should have made the connection. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to send a message to him so coincidentally. This was obviously a test. "What is it?" Lu Yi replied. "Nothing. It's just that I haven't seen you for too long and miss you. I wonder when you are free? This little brother wants to come and visit you. I have been a little busy recently. I will let you know when I am free. No rush. Take care of your own things first." After chatting for a while, they ended the message. Lu Yi muttered to himself as he pinched his notes. From the looks of it, Chu Shen was certain that he was Fa Wuzuan. However, from the way he spoke, it was clear that he did not want to reveal the truth. He should be willing to help him hide the truth. On this point, from their previous interactions, Lu Yi was willing to trust him. But then again, hundreds of millions of spiritual jades were a great fortune for a loner like Lu Yi. However, for a region like Ling Circle, it was nothing. Chu Shen had no reason to expose his secret because of this. Little Dumbo and the other girls followed Chu Shen and flew to the Wanxiang Sea. Somehow they suddenly felt that Chu Shen seemed to be very happy. When they arrived at the Wanxiang Sea, Chu Shen took them to the Wanxiang Island on purpose. They went into a restaurant and had a good meal. The cost of the spiritual jades made their hearts ache. They all came from a poor place and had never seen a big scene. The cost of this meal was enough for them to practice for many years. Lu Yi had arrived at the Death Star. He found a hidden cave and set up many tactical formations to protect it. Then he took out his blue sea snail. Whether or not he could open up a path of wealth that belonged solely to him, it all depended on this. He put the blue sea snail near his mouth and blew it gently. At the same time, he urged his spiritual power to pour into it. Lu Yi was happy because the blue sea snail reacted. At the tip of the snail, the cyan light began to flow. Under Lu Ye's close attention, the light became brighter and brighter. Then it swept out and dyed the space in front of him blue. It twisted and turned into a door. Lu Yi immediately took the blue sea snail and flashed into the door. The place where he appeared was the Constellation Hall that he had stayed before. The seaweed he brought back was still piled up in the corner. He turned around and looked, but there seemed to be no trace of others. The door of the Constellation Hall was closed, which made Lu Yi frown slightly. If he remembered correctly, the door was open when he left. But now it was closed somehow. He walked forward and was about to find out. Suddenly his ears moved and he listened carefully. He vaguely heard some sound outside. After listening carefully, there was indeed a sound. He walked quickly to the door, stretched out his hands and slowly opened the door. As soon as he opened a small gap, a figure rushed in from outside. It was Bai Lu riding her seahorse Star Beast. After entering the hall, Bai Lu said angrily, "Why are you in here? Why did it take you so long to open the door?" She shouted outside for a long time, but there was no response. She almost thought that Lu Yi was not here. "You've been here for a long time?" Lu Yi was stunned. "Yes." Bai Lu nodded. "Then you can come in by yourself." "I can't open it," Bai Lu replied. "You can't." He remembered that the door of the Constellation Hall was broken open by the seahorse under Bai Lu. Since then it had not been closed. Since the seahorse could break it open, there was no reason that Bai Lu could not. "I really can't open it," Bai Lu repeated. It did not look like she was lying. Lu Yi thought for a moment and closed the door of the Constellation Hall. He said, "Try again. It's the same no matter how many times I try." Bai Lu said and reached out to push the door. However, Lu Yi found that no matter how hard she tried, the door of the Constellation Hall would not open. That was strange. Lu Yi looked at the seahorse next to her. Let it try. It was the one who broke the door open last time. The seahorse was intelligent. It did not wait for Bai Lu's order and moved on its own. But strangely, it could not break the door open this time. What's going on? Lu Yi did not understand. Chapter 1466. Confused, Lu Yi closed the door to the Constellation Palace, then opened it again, closed it again, and opened it again without any difficulty at all. Bai Lu was overjoyed. Li Tai Bai, you really are favored by the temple. If he wasn't favored by the temple, there was no way that Lu Yi could open the door while others couldn't. Lu Yi didn't deny it. It was true that the seahorse had been able to break open the door, but it couldn't do so now. There were only two possibilities. The first was timing. When the seahorse broke open the door, the Constellation Palace's door could be opened and closed at any time. The second possibility was that the Constellation Palace's own will allowed the seahorse to enter, which was why the door was opened. But no matter which possibility it was, Lu Yi could open the door, but Bai Lu and the seahorse couldn't. Most likely no one else could either. Li Tai Bai, the Grand Elder, said that if you have nothing to do, you should go to the merfolk's territory more often. You're so bored here alone, Bai Lu said. The Grand Elder hadn't said this before. She had only said it in the Grand Elder's name. She really did want to bring Lu Yi to the merfolk's territory to have some fun, seeing how lonely he was. Lu Yi shook his head. I should go. Since you're here, I'll take it as a farewell. Bai Lu was stunned, and then her expression changed slightly. Where are you going? Lu Yi pointed upwards. I'm going back to where I came from, of course. Bai Lu was completely stunned. She didn't expect Lu Yi to be able to leave this place. From her and the Grand Elder's point of view, Lu Yi probably wouldn't be able to leave this place. After all, the 10,000 Elephant Sea was filled with hidden dangers. Even if a Constellation Realm cultivator had the ability to move freely here, he wouldn't be able to travel too far. It was hard for her to accept. Lu Yi was just about to say something when he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head in the direction of the door and frowned. There's not much time left. I should go. Only then did Bai Lu come to her senses. She glanced at the door and vaguely sensed something. That door leads to the outside world? Lu Yi nodded. Do you want to go take a look together? Bai Lu's expression dimmed. Have you forgotten? My clansmen have been poisoned, and without the isolation of the 10,000 Elephant Sea, they will immediately die. I can't go outside. That's all right, I'll come over often in the future. Please help me pass a message to the Queen and the Great Elder. Thank you for your generosity. Oh, okay, Bai Lu replied blankly. Then I'll take my leave. Lu Yi said and headed for the door. Just as he reached the door, Bai Lu's voice came from behind him. Li Tai Bai. Lu Yi paused and looked back only to see Bai Lu smiling at him. Remember to come back more often when you're free. Lu Yi nodded, then turned around and rushed into the door. At the same time his figure disappeared, the door disappeared as well. Bai Lu stared at the seahorse in disappointment. The seahorse seemed to have sensed its master's disappointment, and it came over and rubbed its head against Bai Lu's body. Suddenly there was movement behind her. Bai Lu turned her head to look and quickly said, "Let's go." For some reason, the door to the Constellation Hall was slowly closing. If they didn't leave now, they wouldn't be able to. Bai Lu rode the seahorse to the Constellation Hall and saw the door close. She didn't believe it and tried again, but found that she still couldn't open the door. She became more and more convinced of the Great Elder's previous judgment that Li Tai Bai was the one favored by the temple. Otherwise it wouldn't make sense that he was the only one who could open the door. Lu Yi reappeared in the cave on the dead planet. He discovered a problem. The door this time was much shorter than the door he usually opened in the Constellation Hall. He faintly guessed that this was probably due to the distance. The Constellation Hall wasn't too far away from the merpeople's territory, so the door could be opened for a longer time. However, this was a dead planet in the Myriad Constellation Galaxy, so it was still very far away from the Constellation Hall. The time it could be opened for was much shorter. Looking at it this way, although the Azure Sea Snail could be used in the Myriad Constellation Galaxy, there must be a distance limit. After a certain distance, the door might not be able to be opened, or even if it was opened, it wouldn't be able to be maintained. Then he thought of something else. If he was the only one who could open the door to the Constellation Hall, then could he put his storage rings in the Constellation Hall? If no one could enter, then there was no possibility of losing them. It wouldn't be too late for him to take them when he needed them. Anyway, the Azure Sea Snail didn't have long intervals between each use, so it wouldn't affect his use. It was better than stringing the storage rings into a string and wrapping them around his waist. He secretly decided that he would do this the next time he entered the Constellation Hall. The Azure Sea Snail's effect had been tested, and the results were satisfactory. Lu Yi immediately left the cave, summoned his planetary boat, and flew toward the myriad Constellation Sea. He was going to make a big purchase. He had thought that the fire elemental treasures that he had bought in Hall number 88, which were worth 10 million spirit jades, would be enough for him to use for a long time. Who would have thought that the trip to the Constellation Hall would deplete all of his reserves? Even the fuel that he had stored in his talent tree was almost depleted. The talent tree was the treasure he relied on the most. It was the foundation of his cultivation, and it couldn't be used without enough fuel. Therefore, no matter what, he had to buy more fire-type treasures this time and let the talent tree devour them, so that he wouldn't encounter similar situations in the future. The myriad Constellation Sea was as magnificent as usual. However, after entering the myriad Constellation Sea this time, Lu Yi immediately noticed something different. The number of battles between the major forces had obviously increased. The myriad Constellation Sea wasn't peaceful, and there were many battles happening almost every day. However, in the past, such battles were only between cultivators. Most of them weren't on a large scale. Even if a spiritual island occupied by a certain force was attacked, it wouldn't be too frequent. However, on his return this time, he saw as many as 7 or 8 spiritual islands being attacked along the way. Moreover, the attacking side all had the help of formation discs, and they formed various different formations that were extremely powerful and imposing. Lu Yi immediately understood that the twin spirit-connected formation disc he created was slowly affecting the structure of the myriad Constellation Sea. There was a rule in the myriad Constellation Sea. People who were not from the local galaxy could not stay for long. Even if they came, they would leave after a certain period of time. Even the number of Yu Yao was limited. The number of Yu Yao each force could stay on the myriad Constellation Sea was equivalent to most people. This was also the method the myriad Constellation Sea used to restrict the external forces. If the number of powerhouses was small, it would be easier for them to control the overall situation. If there were too many of them, it would be difficult for them to control them. Since ancient times, all the major forces had followed this rule. After all, this was someone else's territory, and a strong dragon couldn't suppress a local snake. Moreover, the various external forces were unwilling to break this rule. This was because the interests of each party were complicated. Once someone broke this rule, the situation would be irreparable. Therefore, in the past, even if a spiritual island was attacked, if both parties were of similar strength, it would be difficult for the attacking party to succeed unless they had overwhelming strength. However, if they had overwhelming strength, it would mean that the spiritual island that the weaker party occupied wasn't very good. Who would be interested in it then? However, things were different now. With the help of the twin chi-connected array disk, if 5 late-stage constellation masters formed a formation, they could be used as ordinary Yu Yao. Which force didn't have late-stage constellation masters who could form multiple formations? This meant that one side would suddenly have several fake Yu Yao. Once these fake Yu Yao joined the fray, they would have a huge impact on the overall situation. The side without the array disk would undoubtedly be at a disadvantage. Therefore, when Jiuyan first learned about the twin chi-connected array disk, she immediately recognized its immense value. This was because this was a treasure that could really change the current situation of the cultivation world. It could allow late-stage constellation masters to have the ability to fight against ordinary Yu Yao. It had only been 2 or 3 months since Lu Ye's auction, and the signs of this were already showing. All the major forces that had won the bid for the array disk had now invested a lot of manpower into deciphering the array disk secrets. Although Lu Yi had left behind a backup plan that caused many array disks to explode in the process of deciphering them, if 100 or 10,000 array disks were to be released, there would definitely be a time when a certain force would be able to figure it out. Once that happened, the twin chi-connected array disk would definitely become widespread. That would be a huge blow to the ordinary Yu Yao realm. After going through untold hardships to cultivate to the Yu Yao realm, they had thought that they would be able to stand above the rest. Who would have thought that a few late-stage constellation masters would be able to form a formation to fight against Sunjiu? They would definitely not feel good about it. There were also some forces that had researched using the array disk to form a formation to see if it could fight against Sunjiu. However, after some testing, they discovered that the array disc was not suitable for Yu Yao. That was because the range it could cover was limited. The constellation masters could barely use it, but Yu Yao was definitely not suitable. Furthermore, experts who had cultivated to the Yu Yao realm would not be used to working together with others, unless they were very close. Many experts from various forces had already predicted the impact that the array disc would have on the future situation. Right now, no matter which force it was, as long as they could be the first to refine array discs on a large scale, they would definitely have a great advantage in the future battles. However, it was not easy to refine array discs on a large scale. After 2 or 3 months, the various major forces had already researched the secrets of array discs. Although they might not be close to the same level, they were still quite thorough. They all knew that the key to refining array discs lay in the strange spirit inscriptions. However, spirit inscriptions were not something that could be constructed just because one wanted to. This was especially true during the refining process, which was extraordinarily difficult. This required a long period of practice. Furthermore, it could only increase the success rate by a little. They did not dare to say that they would definitely succeed. Therefore, the various major forces could not understand where Fa Wuzuan had gotten so many array discs from. It was not right to say that he had the support of a major force behind him. After all, no major force would be willing to share such a killing weapon with others. However, if he did not have the support of a major force, how could he refine so many array discs on his own? Chapter 1467. This time, Lu Yi did not head straight for the Island of Versatility. Although the Island of Versatility was the largest spiritual island in the Sea of Versatility and was rich in resources, it did not mean that the other spiritual islands were not as good. Many of the spiritual islands were occupied by powerful forces. Behind them there was an entire galaxy or a top realm. Hence, there were many good things to be sold on the spiritual islands. In particular, there were some local specialties that could only be purchased on these specific spiritual islands. Lu Yi wanted to buy more fire-type treasures this time. Therefore, he decided to sweep through the spiritual islands and buy all the fire-type treasures he could see. Lu Yi took out his star map and quickly arrived at a spiritual island called Dufang Island. This was the property of the Dufang Galaxy. The spiritual island was not as big as the Island of Versatility, but the energy on the island was relatively rich. It was one of the best in the entire Sea of Versatility. When Lu Yi stepped onto the island, he could clearly feel Yu Yao's spiritual force scanning him. It was obviously the investigation of the Yu Yao realm expert who was in charge of Dufang Island. He did not mind. This was their territory. Since he was here, they would definitely check him out. Following the flow of people, Lu Yi found a place where shops were gathered. He went from shop to shop and bought any fire-type treasures he saw. Half a day had passed by the time he left Dufang Island. For the next month, Lu Yi continued to do this. Some spiritual islands required a certain amount of spiritual jades to enter, just like the Island of Versatility. However, most of the spiritual islands did not require a fee. Lu Yi then realized that the spiritual islands that required one to pay spiritual jades to enter were no less popular than the other spiritual islands. In fact, they were even more popular than the other spiritual islands. Without exception, these spiritual islands had their own unique treasures. If cultivators wanted to purchase these treasures, they would have to go to the spiritual island. Naturally, the cost of a few spiritual jades would not be too much of a concern. In a month's time, Lu Yi had visited at least 100 spiritual islands. His horizons had been broadened. He saw many strange things, especially some local specialties. They were all good stuff. Lu Yi felt that some of them would be useful to him, so he bought some along the way. 100 spiritual islands were not worth mentioning in the entire Wanxiang Sea. Lu Yi did not go to the other spiritual islands. If he wanted to visit all the spiritual islands, he would need at least 1 or 2 years. The other spiritual islands were much weaker than the spiritual islands that Lu Yi had been to. There was no need to waste time. A month later, Lu Yi finally arrived at the Island of Versatility. After paying a few pieces of mystical jades, he received a badge and went straight to the island. He went straight to the marketplace and came to the place where he had bought the dragon breath crystals. It was still the same stall owner from before. This was not surprising because according to the stall owner, he was ordered to sell things here, and he would have to stay here for a few years before someone would come to replace him. It was not time yet. After a few interactions, Lu Yi had become familiar with him and knew that his name was Nja. Fellow Taoist, long time no see. Are you here to buy dragon breath crystals again? Nja greeted him with a smile. After the opening of the Constellation Hall, almost all the Constellation Realm cultivators had fled. Since then he had never seen Lu Yi again. As a matter of fact, Lu Yi had met him before, as this guy had gone to the 88th Hall to do some business. He had even taken care of him when he was shopping at the 88th Hall. Lu Yi raised his head. "How many do you have in stock?" And Zhou was startled after hearing this. "Quite a lot." Lu Yi calmly said, "My master is very satisfied with the quality of your dragon breath crystals, and has decided to maintain a long-term friendly relationship with you. However, regarding the price..." Enja had already guessed that Lu Yi was not buying the dragon breath crystals for his own use, as Lu Yi had been buying them too frequently. It was impossible for a single person to use so many dragon breath crystals. After hearing Lu Ye's words, he immediately realized that there was a faction supporting Lu Yi. Although he had no idea what the faction was planning to do, he knew that they needed a large amount of dragon breath crystals. However, he did not know that Lu Yi was only making things up. After all, it was easy to arouse the suspicion of others if one were to buy too many dragon breath crystals. Besides, Lu Yi was well aware of the principle of not showing off one's wealth. "I'll sell it to someone else for 700 yuan, no bargaining. Since fellow Taoist wants it, I'll lower it by 5 yuan from the original price. Of course, the prerequisite is that fellow Taoist needs a large amount." Lu Yi said, "I'll take as much as you have." And Zhou was overjoyed. "Then you better watch carefully." As he said this, he searched his body. Out of nowhere, he took out a few storage rings and placed them in front of Lu Yi. Lu Yi checked them one by one and realized that they were filled with dragon breath crystals. There were at least 10,000 pieces in each ring. According to the price that Enja had set for Lu Yi, the dragon breath crystals in each storage ring were worth close to 8 million pieces of spiritual jade. There were a few storage rings, and that was tens of millions of spiritual jade. Lu Yi did not expect this guy to have so many in stock. However, this was a good thing for him. In the past month, he had only bought so many dragon breath crystals from the various spiritual islands. He secretly rejoiced that he had made a trip to the market before going to the Vientiane Trade Union. His harvest was not bad. According to the price that they had agreed on, Lu Yi took out the corresponding amount of spiritual jade, and the transaction was completed. Enja put away the storage rings that were full of spiritual jade and then said, "Fellow Taoist, you said that you hope that our two sects can maintain a long-term friendly cooperation." Lu Yi nodded. "We still need a lot of dragon breath crystals. If your realm has any, please take them out and we will buy them all." Enja smiled so widely that his eyes narrowed into slits. "We do have them, but we do not have any in stock. I have to go back and report this matter and then transfer more from the realm. This round trip will take at least half a year. I wonder if fellow Taoist is in a hurry to use them." The batch of dragon breath crystals that he had was not brought out from the realm all at once. Instead, it was brought over by his predecessors and accumulated here. This time, he had sold everything, which was undoubtedly a good thing for him, because he did not have to painstakingly set up a stall here and sell them for a few dozen pieces. It was also a good thing for the realm behind him. A one-time profit of several tens of millions of spiritual jade was a considerable amount of wealth no matter where it was. Moreover, if he could really establish a cooperation with Lu Yi, Enja would have made a great contribution. In the future, the dragon breath crystals produced in this realm would no longer have to worry about a lack of sales. "There's no hurry. Just make the necessary preparations and contact me," Lu Yi said. "Would it be convenient for fellow Taoists to exchange musical note imprints?" Enja asked. Lu Yi naturally did not refuse. After exchanging musical note imprints, Enja left without stopping, clearly preparing to return to his realm. However, he had such a large amount of spiritual jade on him, so he had to be careful. If he was intercepted along the way, he would want to cry but have no tears. After leaving the market, Lu Yi thought for a moment and decided not to go to the Vientiane Trade Union. Originally, he had planned to buy fire attribute treasures from the Vientiane Trade Union if he could not buy enough at the market. Although it was a little expensive, it was not as expensive as the price in the 88th Hall. Now that he had bought so many dragon breath crystals from Enja, he did not need them for the time being. He also considered whether he should sell the seaweed and conches he had brought back from the Constellation Hall and the various star beasts he had killed before, but after careful consideration, he decided against it. It was undeniable that these things were of great value, but there was no way to explain their origins. He could not tell others that he had brought them out from the bottom of the Vientiane Sea. For the time being, he did not lack spiritual jade, so there was no need to ask for trouble. After leaving the Vientiane Island, Lu Yi took out the star map for reference and headed in a certain direction. 2 days later he arrived at an extremely remote deserted island. There were many deserted islands like this on the Vientiane Sea. Some were big, some were small. If the cultivators who came and went had nowhere to go, they were used to resting here. Deserted islands like this that were not occupied by cultivators did not even have a name on the star map, only a label. Some small deserted islands did not even have a label. The deserted island in front of him was not too small, but because its location was not very good, very few cultivators would pass by here. Landing on the ground, Lu Yi looked around and found a cave in the cliff face of the island. Jumping into it, Yang Kai saw that the cave was not deep, only a few dozen feet in diameter. There were no signs of human activity, so it was obviously naturally formed. Lu Yi was undoubtedly very satisfied with this place, but he did not stay here for long. Instead, he went out and left a hidden imperial tool on the deserted island before returning to the cave. This way, if he encountered any unexpected situation, he would not be trapped in the cave and could use the imperial tool he had left behind to escape. After setting up a few more concealment formations, Lu Yi sat down cross-legged. He came here mainly to let the talent tree devour the treasures he had bought. The fire-type treasures that came were all from Lu Ye's experience in the Constellation Hall. Lu Yi felt that he had to store more fuel for his innate tree. Only then would he be able to prepare for a rainy day. However, he was not in a hurry to do so. Instead, he took out 2 spiritual jades and held them in his hands, silently refining them. Now that he had advanced to the late stage of the Constellation Hall, he wanted to know how much the consumption of spiritual jades would increase during cultivation. When he had just advanced to the Constellation Hall, he only needed 100 or so spiritual jades a month to satisfy his cultivation needs. It was not that he could only refine that much. With the talent tree, the efficiency of refining spiritual jades could be increased by several times, but that would only cause unnecessary waste. 100 or so spiritual jades a month was the best and most reasonable cultivation speed that would not cause waste. Later on, as his cultivation increased, his demand for spiritual jades slowly increased as well. When he reached the middle stage, he needed about 400 spiritual jades a month. Now that he was at the late stage, he would definitely increase again. After some testing, Lu Yi obtained an answer. At present, his demand for spiritual jades was about 1,000 spiritual jades a month, which was within his expectations. However, as his cultivation slowly increased in the future, his demand would inevitably increase as well. Chapter 1468. 1,000 spirit jades a month was nothing to Lu Yi. He had 80 million spirit jades and many spirit crystals. 1,000 spirit jades was a drop in the bucket. However, this was only the consumption of spirit jades. In fact, his cultivation relied more on the talent tree's devouring and tempering. The spirit jades he spent were all used to buy fire-type treasures. Such an expenditure was terrifying. For example, if he used spirit jades to advance from the middle stage to the late stage, Lu Yi estimated that he would only use 100 to 200,000 spirit jades at most. However, the actual expenditure was 10 million spirit jades, a difference of almost 100 times. However, Lu Yi decided to stabilize his cultivation and control the speed of his cultivation. Therefore, he would not use too much of the talent tree's fuel unless he took things too hard and went deeper into the Wanxiang Sea. It was basically impossible for such a thing to happen. After confirming the consumption of his current cultivation, Lu Yi waved his hand and a small mountain of fire-type treasures appeared beside him. He activated the talent tree's power. Roots invisible to the naked eye extended and devoured the energy of the fire-type treasures. Lu Yi could clearly sense that the talent tree's fuel reserves were slowly increasing. Lu Yi did not need to spend much effort on the talent tree's ability to devour the energy of the fire-type treasures. He only needed to replenish them when the fire-type treasures were almost exhausted. After thinking for a while, Lu Yi did not deduce the concealment spirit pattern. Instead, he took out the 2 items he had taken from the Constellation Hall. One was the minor Constellation Hall, and the other was a small knife. Lu Yi already understood that the small knife was a kind of inheritance. He only needed to slowly comprehend and cultivate it. However, Lu Yi did not know what the minor Constellation Hall was for. He did not have the time to study it back then. At this moment, he held the minor Constellation Hall in his hand and observed it carefully. He did not see anything special about it. It was like a Constellation Hall that had been shrunk countless times. There was no reaction when he poured his spirit chi into it. Lu Yi tried to take out a few spirit jades and put them in. There was also no reaction. He put spirit crystals in. There was still no reaction. Lu Yi tried many other strange things. The minor constellation hall was like a block of wood. This thing, what exactly was it for? Lu Yi was puzzled. Logically speaking, this was a gift from the constellation hall, so it couldn't be a useless object. However, no matter how he tried, he still couldn't activate the power of this object. Helplessly, he could only temporarily give up on researching it. Perhaps in the future, he would inadvertently discover its use. Putting away the minor constellation palace, Lu Yi picked up the small knife and studied it with a serious expression. Lu Yi infused his divine sense into it, and in the next instant, he saw a flash of saber light, followed by a slight pain in his head. He closed his eyes and carefully comprehended the mysteries of that strike. Many thoughts surged in his mind, and he seemed to have comprehended something. It was different from the inheritance of the tyrant saber art. The inheritance of the tyrant saber art allowed one to immerse their mind in it. However, the inheritance of this small knife required Lu Ye's divine sense to be injured as the price. He had to use his own pain to figure out the true meaning of the knife. It was hard to say which of the two methods of inheritance was better, but in comparison the former was undoubtedly safer. However, Lu Yi preferred the latter because only by experiencing it for himself would he be able to clearly discern the various profundities hidden within the inheritance. It was just that the feeling of having his divine sense severed was not very pleasant. Fortunately, he had bought many treasures from the various spiritual islands that nourished the divine sense. The prices were ridiculously high and they came in handy at this moment. When he was in Jianghu, he could still use the soul-cleansing water. However, there was not much of it left now, and it could not support his cultivation for too long. Every time he used his divine sense to observe, Lu Yi experienced the feeling of having his divine sense severed, but each time he could gain new insights and gain new insights. Gradually, Lu Yi became aware of the profoundness of this inheritance. After all, it was a reward from the minor constellation palace. In terms of level, the tyrant saber art from the dragon soaring realm was far inferior. However, the higher the level of the saber art, the better it was. It also depended on who was using it. If the level of the saber art was high, it would be useless if one's combat skills were insufficient. Days passed and Lu Yi was immersed in this unique cultivation. He could not extricate himself. His divine sense was being severed again and again, but it was controlled within an acceptable range. With the help of various treasures, it would not leave any indelible damage. Lu Yi found that the strength of his divine sense was gradually increasing in this cycle. This was an unexpected surprise. In addition, he also discovered something interesting. The seaweed that he brought out from the Constellation Hall actually had a very good nourishing effect on his divine sense. This discovery was completely unexpected. When he was observing and comprehending the inheritance in the small saber, his divine sense was being severed again and again. It was impossible for Lu Yi to maintain this cultivation all the time. In his spare time, he would occasionally study the minor constellation palace, occasionally use the talent tree to deduce the concealment spiritual inscriptions, and occasionally do other things. For example, roast some star beast meat to eat. In the past, he felt that the seaweed should not be something ordinary. It might have some medicinal value, but he had never tried it. This time he casually tried it and found that his damaged divine sense was recovering faster. This was obviously the work of the seaweed. Lu Yi immediately realized that the value of the seaweed was much greater than he had imagined. This was because among the items used by cultivators for healing, treasures that could heal and nourish the divine sense were far more valuable than treasures that could heal the physical body. Lu Yi had a deep understanding of this. He had not bought many treasures that could nourish the divine sense, but he had spent a lot of spirit jades. Unfortunately, these seaweeds, like the star beast he brought back, could not be sold for the time being. Lu Yi could not help but miss second senior sister and Wuxia. If they were here, perhaps he could find a way to refine these things that could not be sold into elixirs. In this way he would not have to worry about being seen through. Moreover, second senior sister had a treasure like the elixir gourd. If she could really research a kind of elixir recipe that used seaweed as the main ingredient, she could easily refine a large number of high-quality elixirs. In a flash, half a month had passed. On this day, Lu Yi was comprehending the inheritance within the dagger. Over the past half a month, he had updated it the fastest. He had gained a lot and vaguely understood the true meaning of the inheritance. This was also the advantage of this inheritance method, which was high enough efficiency. If it were the inheritance method like the Tyrant Saber technique, the efficiency would not be so high. If Lu Yi wanted to achieve the same level of comprehension, he would need to spend more than 10 times more time. Suddenly, something strange came out of his body. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment and quickly immersed his mind to take a look. At first glance he was greatly surprised. This was because the talent tree had disappeared and turned into a fire seed. Moreover, when he looked at it, the fire seed's light was not very bright. It was like a weak candle flame gently swaying. Is the talent tree going to change? Having experienced this before, Lu Yi knew what was going on at a glance. It was obvious that the talent tree had entered the process of changing. He was stunned for a moment. This was unexpected. It had been many years since he obtained the talent tree, and it had undergone 2 changes. Naturally, Lu Yi could detect a certain pattern. There was only one requirement for the talent tree to change, and that was to devour enough fuel reserves. When the talent tree's fuel reserves reached a certain level, it would enter the process of changing. When Lu Yi first obtained the talent tree, it only had the effect of burning foreign objects that invaded his body. This allowed Lu Yi to stand out among the low-level cultivators because his spiritual power was pure enough, so he could fight above his level. The first change gave the talent tree the ability to devour foreign objects, and its roots could also split. With the help of the blood shadow and the Bingdi lotus, Lu Yi condensed his own clone. The second change gave the talent tree the ability to inscribe new spirit patterns on its leaves and even deduce them. Lu Ye's Divine Edge, Holy Guard, and the new Twin Breath branch were all born in this way. Lu Yi had also thought about what kind of new ability the talent tree would evolve if it changed again. However, he did not deliberately pursue this kind of thing and had always left it to fate because he felt that the current talent tree was strong enough. It was true that the talent tree was his greatest reliance, but he did not treat the talent tree as his only asset. The most important thing for cultivators was to strengthen themselves. Unexpectedly, the talent tree was going to change for the 3rd time today. However, it was not strange when he thought about it carefully. This time, the talent tree had devoured too many fire-type treasures, which were close to 100 million spirit jades. The fire-type treasures had turned into fuel reserves and should have satisfied the needs of the talent tree. Previously in the Wanxiang Sea, although the talent tree had also devoured close to 100 million spirit jades worth of fire-type treasures, it had not devoured them all at once. It had devoured them many times, so it naturally could not satisfy the needs of the talent tree. Since things had already come to this, Lu Yi was a little curious about what would be different about the talent tree after this change. However, looking at the appearance of the fire seed, this change might last for some time. During this time, the talent tree's power could not be used anymore. After putting away the remaining fire-type treasures, Lu Yi sighed and had to go buy more. After the talent tree's change, the fuel it had devoured before would definitely be used up. Fortunately, he had already reached an agreement with Enjia and reached a cooperative relationship. When Enjia returned, he should be able to bring back a large batch of dragon breath crystals. However, before that, he had to go to the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce to buy some spares. This time, the talent tree had devoured close to 100 million spirit jades worth of fire-type treasures in one go. It would definitely need to devour more next time. Lu Yi felt that the 80 million spirit jades he had on hand were not enough for him to live without worries. Sooner or later they would all be used up. It was time to find an opportunity to start a trade with the mermaid clan. That was a way to make money that belonged solely to him. As long as he maintained the trade with the mermaid clan, he would be able to get as many spirit jades as he wanted in the future. Chapter 1469. Lu Ye's talent tree could not continue to derive spiritual patterns after 3 transformations. Lu Yi could only continue to comprehend the saber technique inheritance in the small saber. When he was cultivating his spirit, he would go out to practice the saber. His progress was good. This deserted island was indeed deserted. Lu Yi had been here for more than a month. Even though this was still the 10,000 Elephant Sea, not many people passed by. For a homeless person like him, this was obviously a good place to stay. Another day, Lu Yi waved the long saber in his hand in front of the cliff. He vaguely felt something but could not understand it. Helpless, he kept the saber and stood there. He knew that some things could not be forced. Since the small saber inheritance was in his hands, he would be able to understand its true meaning sooner or later. Hence he was not in a hurry. The transformation of the talent tree in his body was not over yet. However, the fire seed had obviously grown much bigger, and the light it emitted was also brighter. From the looks of it, the transformation of the talent tree would be completed in a few days. Lu Yi did not hesitate anymore. He returned to the cave and kept the formation flags he set up. He took out his planetary boat and headed towards the island of versatility. Not long after he left, a few rays of light landed. The leader looked around and laughed. This is the place. From now on, this will be the territory of the domineering palace. A beautiful girl who looked like a fool said weakly, Senior Brother Chu, we don't have any objections to you choosing this place, but this name, could you please consider it a little more? The others nodded quickly. Obviously, they felt that the name was not reliable enough. Senior Brother Chu waved his hand and said domineeringly, what's there to reconsider? Domineering palace sounds domineering. It's decided then. His excitement made the girls who followed him feel helpless. However, he had always been the leader of the group. At this time they could not refute him. Moreover, with Senior Brother Chu's status and background, although this domineering palace did not sound good and could easily arouse the hostility of others, there would not be many people who would dare to casually look for trouble, especially such a deserted island that no one cared about. If they occupied it, then so be it. Senior Brother Chu said, we've found a place. What do we do next? Everyone, do you have any suggestions? A lady who looked so weak that she could be blown away by the wind said softly, I see that there are many people on other spiritual islands. Should we recruit some people? Senior Brother Chu's eyes lit up when he heard this. Yes, we should start recruiting now and strengthen our own strength. Only when we are strong enough can we stand firm. One day the name of our domineering palace will resound throughout the Wanxiang Sea, and many spiritual islands will come to pay their respects. He seemed to have expected this scene, and his expression was very excited. The girls looked at each other and felt sad. They felt as if they had followed the wrong person. They had all come from poor places step by step. Although they didn't have much experience, they all knew the principle of the strong being respected. Senior Brother Chu was different. He had an extraordinary background and had never suffered any hardships or grievances since he was a child. He still had naive expectations and fantasies about this tattered cultivation world. Lu Yi was on his way to the island of all appearances on his star boat when he heard some noises coming from the musical note. He checked it and found that it was Chu Shen who had sent him a message. Big brother, I have led my men to occupy a spiritual island. We are short of manpower now. Are you interested in coming to take charge? Lu Yi was surprised that Chu Shen had occupied a spiritual island. He didn't know why this guy had come to the Wanxiang Sea to occupy a spiritual island. Normally, only external forces would occupy a spiritual island if they needed a place to stay. Moreover, the spiritual islands in the Wanxiang Sea were a kind of resource. A good spiritual island was rich in energy and had spiritual jade mines. Occupying a spiritual island was equivalent to occupying a portion of cultivation resources. However, Chu Shen was a native cultivator of the Wanxiang Galaxy. The Wanxiang Galaxy already occupied the largest island of all appearances. There was no need for him to occupy another one. Moreover, a spiritual island occupied by Chu Shen would not be a spiritual island. Lu Yi guessed that it was a deserted island that no one cared about. This young master from the world of car bells was probably playing a game of house. Lu Yi was naturally not interested and couldn't be bothered to reply to him. 2 days later he returned to the island of all appearances. He activated the thousand-faced spiritual inscriptions and changed his appearance slightly. Then he entered the Wanxiang Trade Union. This time he was here to purchase fire elemental treasures. After the talent tree's transformation was completed, the fuel that was devoured would definitely be used up. Lu Yi had to be prepared. He casually found a manager of the trade union and had a conversation with him. The manager was overjoyed after hearing the number of items that Lu Yi wanted to purchase. He immediately took out a list. As long as it was on the list, the trade union would have it in stock. Lu Yi negotiated with the manager and tried his best to obtain the fire elemental treasures at a discounted price. He then purchased a large number of mystical pills of various kinds. He then left the Wanxiang Trade Union. This purchase caused Lu Ye's wealth to decrease significantly. He could not help but exclaim, mystical jades were indeed not enough. He wandered around the island of all appearances for a while and found a secluded place. He then changed his appearance and returned to the Wanxiang Trade Union. The main reason was that he had nowhere to go for the time being. The talent tree's transformation would be completed in the next 2 days. As he did not want to wander around, he decided to stay at the Wanxiang Trade Union. The 3rd floor of the trade union was a place for guests to stay. Of course, it was ridiculously expensive. This was also the reason why Lu Yi had not stayed here before, but he could not care less now. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. While Lu Yi was comprehending the saber technique inheritance in the guest room, he felt a strange movement in his body. He quickly immersed his mind to observe and found that the talent tree had indeed completed its transformation. He immediately looked forward to it. He did not know what new changes the talent tree would undergo after this transformation. Upon closer inspection, the talent tree was still burning fiercely, like a huge tree of flames. However, Lu Yi found that the talent tree seemed to be somewhat different from before. It was not the shape but the flames burning on the talent tree. In the past, the flames on the talent tree gave off a feeling of violence and destruction. However, the flames now seemed to have a vigorous vitality, and even a sense of spirituality and elegance. This was a very contradictory feeling, but Lu Yi could clearly feel it. Carefully experiencing the novelty of the flames, Lu Yi had a faint feeling that the talent tree's ability to burn impurities could not only be used by him, but also by others. Before this transformation, the talent tree did not have such power. When he first obtained the talent tree, Lu Yi had wondered if he could use the power of the talent tree to cleanse the impurities in other people's bodies and make them as pure as himself. At that time he wanted to try it on Hu Pa, but because he was not sure, he did not dare to act rashly, lest he caused any damage to Hu Pa. The two subsequent transformations did not give Lu Yi such a feeling. However, he did not expect that after this transformation, this idea from a long time ago would come true. Although he did not have a target to try it on, Lu Yi could still conclude that the talent tree did indeed have the power to burn impurities in other people's bodies. As for whether it would cause any damage to others in the process, Lu Yi could not tell. He would have to try it out to know. There was a high probability that it would, so he needed to have extremely strong control over his own spiritual power. This transformation was not bad. In the future, if his friends or family were to be invaded by some kind of power that could not be expelled, he could help to resolve it. However, the talent tree's transformation was definitely far more than that. While taking out the fire-type treasure he had bought previously for the talent tree to devour, Lu Yi continued to observe. Soon he discovered that after this transformation, the talent tree's devouring efficiency had increased by a lot. Compared to a few days ago, the talent tree could devour the same fire-type treasure in a shorter time. This was because the roots of the talent tree had become more lush and longer. This was obviously the root cause of the increase in efficiency. This was something that should be done. Lu Yi urged Blood Shadow and Jing Tilian to condense a clone with the help of the talent tree's splitting. However, he was disappointed to discover that there was still only one clone. There was no way to condense a second one. After continuing to try for a while, Lu Yi discovered that apart from the previous transformation, there did not seem to be any other changes to the talent tree. Just this. If that was the case, it seemed that this transformation did not have much meaning. The last transformation even gave the talent tree the power to deduce spirit runes. Lu Yi was speechless for a moment. He wished he could strangle the talent tree and make it spit out the fuel that it had consumed previously. It was worth 10 million spirit jades. However, at this point, Lu Yi could only accept it helplessly. He secretly comforted himself that there must be other changes to the talent tree. It was just that he had not discovered them yet. He continued to let the talent tree devour the energy of the fire-type treasures that he had bought. This time he did not have to worry that it would transform again. According to his previous experience, the talent tree would definitely need an even greater amount of fuel storage for the next transformation. Lu Yi suspected that even if he used all the spirit jades he had to buy fire-type treasures, he would not be able to satisfy its transformation requirements. The talent tree's efficiency of devouring fire-type treasures had increased by a lot, which also saved Lu Yi a lot of time. 3 days later he left the Island of Wonders. He had to make a trip to the Merfolk clan's territory. Previously, he had bought a large number of spirit pills from the Island of Wonders in preparation for this trip. The Merfolk clan was in dire need of such things. Lu Yi wanted to buy some spirit treasures to bring over, but in the environment under the sea, spirit treasures would not be of much use. He found a deserted island nearby and found a secluded place to set up a protective formation. Then he took out the Azure Sea conch and blew into it. If he wanted to go to the Merfolk clan's territory, he had to take 2 steps. The first step was to return to the Constellation Hall and erase the conch mark that he had left behind. Then he would return. The next time he could use the Azure Sea conch, he would be able to directly enter the Merfolk clan's territory and teleport out of the Constellation Hall. Otherwise, Lu Yi would not have enough time to swim from the Constellation Hall to the Merfolk clan's territory. If the door to the Constellation Hall disappeared when he swam to the Merfolk clan's territory, he would be trapped under the sea. Chapter 1470. The door to the Azure Sea snail's berth could not be maintained for a long time. This was a drawback that could not be changed. He originally wanted to use the Constellation Hall as a place to store his supplies, but now it seemed that this plan was ruined because he could not run back and forth from the Constellation Hall to the Merfolk territory in a single teleportation. The door could only land in one place. As the sound spread, the green light on the Azure Sea Snail swept out and turned into a door. Lu Yi did not stop and plunged into it. Time removed the mark left by the Azure Sea Snail, and then ran to the place where he piled up the seaweed and star beast corpses, stuffing them all into his storage ring. In order to store these things, Lu Yi specially asked for a pile of storage rings from the Chamber of Commerce's main office. These things were not valuable, and under the premise of doing such a big business, they were willing to give them away for free. In a short while, the seaweed and star beast corpses piled up in the corner were cleaned up. Lu Yi looked at the door and felt that there was still some time, so he hurried to the Constellation Hall's door and raised his hand to push it open. When he came back last time, he happened to run into Bai Lu. Lu Yi thought that if Bai Lu was still there this time, he would ask her to pass a message to the Merfolk that he would go to the Merfolk territory in a few days and send them some spirit pills. The door opened, but he did not see Bai Lu. This was reasonable. Bai Lu already knew that he had left here, so it was naturally impossible for her to come over for no reason. There was no other way. He could only wait until the Azure Sea Snail could be used again and go directly. Just as he was about to turn around and go back, he saw a strange-looking star beast passing by not far away. It looked very plump. Lu Yi had not seen this star beast before, so he took out the sword gourd and killed it on the spot with a sword chi. His figure moved and he rushed into the sea to collect the star beast's corpse. Just as he was about to return to the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi suddenly noticed some abnormal movements in the storage space on the back of his hand. He was even more surprised when he saw the source of this abnormal movement. Because the minor Constellation Hall he placed inside was actually vibrating slightly. Lu Yi didn't know what was going on. Normally, things placed in storage spaces were isolated from the outside world and wouldn't be easily activated. This was especially true for things like the minor Constellation Hall. Lu Yi had studied it many times, but he still couldn't figure out its use. This time it was actually vibrating slightly on its own. As expected of something bestowed by the Constellation Hall, it was indeed different from the rest. Lu Yi hurriedly took out the minor Constellation Hall. He did not have to worry about it being corroded by the seawater. The Constellation Hall had been standing under the myriad phenomenon sea for countless years. This item looked exactly the same as the Constellation Hall, so there was no reason for it to be corroded so easily. Sure enough, after taking it out, the minor Constellation Palace showed no signs of being corroded. Not only that, Lu Yi even felt that it was crazily devouring the surrounding seawater. Bubbles of various sizes appeared out of thin air and quickly rose up. Lu Yi could clearly sense that these bubbles contained extremely pure and rich starry sky energy. Momentarily stunned, he suddenly gained insight into the might of this minor Constellation Hall. However, now was not the time to continue trying. The Azure Sea Snail's door could not be maintained for too long. He had to hurry back. Putting away the minor Constellation Hall, Zhang Xian walked up to the door and entered it. When he reappeared, he was already on the desolate island from before. Holding the minor Constellation Hall in his hand, he observed it carefully. At this moment it was no longer moving. He tried to channel his spiritual energy into it, but there was no reaction, just like before. However, with his previous experience, Lu Yi understood that if he wanted to channel this thing, the spiritual energy in a cultivator's body was not enough. Even spiritual jades and spiritual crystals were not enough. Only the seawater of the 10,000 Elephant Sea could do it. No wonder he had not found a way to channel it before. Lu Yi had never thought to channel it under the 10,000 Elephant Sea. This time, if it were not for a freak combination of factors, he would not have discovered it for the time being. However, he would definitely enter the 10,000 Elephant Sea to cultivate in the future. At that time he would naturally be able to detect it. Walking out of his hiding place, Zhang Xian looked around for a while. Finding an empty space, he plunged into the 10,000 Elephant Sea. He did not dare to go too deep in case he encountered any ferocious star beasts. He only stopped 300 feet below the surface of the sea. The same scene as before appeared. The minor Constellation Hall was crazily devouring the seawater of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Bubbles of various sizes appeared out of thin air. Holding the minor Constellation Hall in one hand, Lu Yi probed into the bubbles with the other. He found that, just as he had perceived before, these bubbles were filled with extremely pure starry sky energy, which was very easy to refine. The minor constellation hall actually had the power to turn the water of the 10,000 Elephant Sea into starry sky energy that cultivators could refine and absorb. If that was the case, then this was truly a great treasure. Everyone knew that the seawater of the 10,000 Elephant Sea was condensed from extremely pure starry sky energy. To any cultivator, this vast 10,000 Elephant Sea was an inexhaustible cultivation treasure trove. However, since ancient times, no cultivator had been able to benefit from it. This was because pure 10,000 Elephant Sea water could not be refined at all. Moreover, it also possessed extremely strong corrosive power. Not only could the cultivator's physical body not withstand this corrosion, but even spiritual treasures and magic treasures could not withstand it. However, it would be different with the minor constellation hall. It could turn the seawater into energy that cultivators could refine. Holding this object in hand was equivalent to using all the water of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Lu Yi suddenly thought of something. In the battle for the minor constellation hall, the victorious cultivator would receive a mysterious light from the heavens as a reward. The mysterious light contained varying amounts of pure energy that could be absorbed and refined by the cultivator. Where did this energy come from? It could not have appeared out of thin air. There had to be a source. Everyone thought that it was the minor constellation hall's own reserves, the newest and fastest. However, now it seemed that it was not at all. The pure energy contained in the mysterious light most likely all came from the 10,000 Elephant Sea. It was the minor constellation hall that transformed the seawater. Therefore, it could be said that the constellation hall itself possessed the ability to transform. The minor constellation hall that it bestowed upon him undoubtedly inherited this ability as well. The minor constellation hall obviously had more than one ability because during the process of transforming the seawater, Lu Yi discovered that he could slightly activate it. After silently sensing it for a moment, Lu Yi tried to control it. Soon, the bubbles that emerged from the minor constellation hall became much more frequent and larger. This undoubtedly meant that its efficiency of transforming the seawater had increased. It could now turn more seawater into starry sky energy in a shorter period of time. Similarly, Lu Yi could also control it to lower its efficiency. The corresponding external manifestation was that the number of bubbles had decreased and shrunk. Not only that, under Lu Ye's control, the minor constellation hall began to devour the starry sky energy that it had reversed. The amount of energy it devoured was not much, so it did not affect the birth of those bubbles. Moreover, the minor constellation hall was still trembling slightly. Lu Yi did not know what the consequences would be if this continued, but some things had to be tested to find out. Not long after, the door to the minor constellation hall suddenly opened. Lu Yi focused his attention and saw that the door was emitting a dazzling light. Lu Yi fixed his eyes on it and his vision suddenly changed. It was clearly a very small thing. When the door was opened, it was only the size of Lu Ye's palm. However, when Lu Yi looked at it, the door rapidly enlarged in his field of vision. He could not help but rush into the door. Lu Yi was completely unprepared and plunged in. When he reappeared, he was no longer in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. He looked around and was surprised to find that he had actually returned to the minor constellation hall. He suddenly realized that the minor constellation hall was connected to the minor constellation hall. He could directly come here through the minor constellation hall. There was a door in front of him, but it was not the same as the door formed by the Azure Sea conch. This door was clearly more solid and stable. Moreover, it looked like the illusion of an open door. This was great. The problem that he had been struggling with was directly solved. In the future, he could totally use the Azure Sea conch to go to the Mermaid Clan's territory. If he wanted to go to the minor constellation hall, he could use the minor constellation hall. He just did not know if the door to the minor constellation hall would have a time limit like the Azure Sea conch. He would have to try again to determine this. Originally, he wanted to stay here for a while longer to see if the door would disappear. However, Lu Yi changed his mind. Without him supporting it, the minor constellation hall would definitely fall into the depths of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. If it fell too deep, it would not be safe for him to go out. Therefore, Lu Yi returned quickly. Through the door that was like the illusion of a door, Lu Yi once again felt the feeling of being enveloped by seawater. He had already returned to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Beside him, the minor constellation hall was indeed sinking slowly. Lu Yi reacted quickly and grabbed it. The door to the minor constellation hall was still open. Lu Yi tried to close it. It was very easy to close it. Lu Yi was not in a hurry to go out. He tried to activate the minor constellation hall's power again, allowing it to swallow the energy of the reversed seawater. Just like before, the door to the minor constellation hall bloomed with dazzling light. After trying this a few times, Lu Yi confirmed one thing. The door to the minor constellation hall could be opened at any time without any time limit. In this aspect it was much better than the Azure Sea Conch. However, the Azure Sea Conch also had its own advantages. It could leave a mark at a certain location in advance and then open the door to the mark. However, the minor constellation hall could not do that. It could only enter the minor constellation hall. In comparison, both teleportation methods had their own advantages. However, the minor constellation hall's ability to reverse seawater was something the Azure Sea Conch did not possess. In this world, apart from the minor constellation hall, there was probably no other treasure with such power. It could be said that with such a treasure, Lu Yi would not have to worry about his cultivation in the future. After all, how large was the volume of the 10,000 Elephant Sea? He could not possibly use it all by himself. However, there was a drawback to using the minor constellation hall's power in this way that could not be ignored. There was no suitable location. The 10,000 Elephant Sea was filled with people coming and going. It was very easy to be discovered. Going under the sea was an option. However, if he went under the sea, why would Lu Yi need the minor constellation hall when he already had the talent tree? Chapter 1471. After figuring out the various powers of the minor constellation palace, Lu Yi realized that other than being able to open a door to the main hall of the constellation palace, its ability to reverse the seawater and turn it into starry sky energy seemed to be of little use to him. This was because he had to go deep into the sea to use the power of the treasure. However, he would have to activate the power of the talent tree if he wanted to go deep into the sea. This shouldn't be the case. Something bestowed by the constellation palace shouldn't be so useless. After thinking for a while, Lu Yi suddenly had an idea. If this idea could be realized, the value of the minor constellation palace would be huge. However, before that he had to find a suitable place to use it. The deserted island that he had stayed on previously seemed to be a good choice. It was a deserted place and no one would pass by on a normal day. It was a good opportunity to give it a try. Thinking of this, Lu Yi immediately took out his planetary boat and headed towards the deserted island that he had stayed on previously. After more than a day he arrived at the deserted island. He scanned it with his divine perception and found no traces of people. This was indeed a deserted place. Without stopping, he dived into the 10,000 Elephant Sea and swam to the bottom of the deserted island. For a normal island, even if part of it was exposed above the sea, there would still be a part that was connected to the ground. That was the foundation of the island. However, the islands on the 10,000 Elephant Sea were different. These islands, regardless of whether they were spiritual islands or deserted islands, did not have a foundation. They were like floating continents on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. The strange thing was that since the beginning of time, these spiritual islands floating on the 10,000 Phenomenon Sea had never changed their positions. No matter if the 10,000 Phenomenon Sea was calm or turbulent, they always stood in the same place and did not move at all. No one knew why this was, just like how no one knew why these spiritual islands, which did not look special, were not eroded by the seawater of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. The countless islands on the 10,000 Elephant Sea seemed to be protected by a mysterious force. Even if Sunshine Realm experts fought on them, they would not be damaged at all. If not for this, the 10,000 Elephant Sea, which was a chaotic environment, would have sunk many islands long ago. Lu Yi moved his body and arrived at the bottom of the deserted island. After searching for a while, he found a suitable location and placed the minor constellation palace in it. He then slightly controlled the power of the minor constellation palace so that it maintained a decent but not exaggerated efficiency in reversing the seawater. For individuals like cultivators, the minor constellation palace was undoubtedly of little value. However, Lu Yi thought that if he placed it here over the years, would it improve the cultivation environment on this deserted island? Turn this deserted island into a spiritual island. If he could, it would mean that he could use the minor constellation palace to create a spiritual island that belonged to him. In the future, if he could find the way home and bring the cultivators of 9 regions over, they would have a suitable and comfortable cultivation environment. Lu Yi wasn't sure if it would work, but from the looks of it, there was a high probability that it would work. However, this kind of thing couldn't be done too quickly, or it would be easy to be targeted. That was why he had to control the efficiency of the minor constellation hall's seawater reversal. After settling down the minor constellation hall and putting on some disguises, Lu Yi returned. He didn't have to worry about someone stealing this treasure. Under the premise that no one could go deep into the Wanxiang Sea, no one but him could take this thing away. As for the star beasts under the sea, there were no traces of powerful star beasts in the shallow waters, so there was even less to worry about. The next step was to wait for the test of time. He returned to the cave in the rock wall where he had previously hidden. He meditated on the inheritance of the small saber while waiting quietly. A few days later, the azure sea snail could finally be used again. Lu Yi immediately took it out and blew softly. The door opened and he walked in. He appeared in front of the heavenly sea snail palace again. However, it was different from the previous 2 times. This time there were 2 mermaids guarding here. After seeing Lu Ye's figure, one of the mermaids immediately ran out, while the other gesticulated and mumbled something to Lu Yi. Lu Yi didn't understand, but after seeing the mermaid running away, he more or less understood the situation. These 2 mermaids were obviously ordered by Lu to guard here. Because she didn't know when Lu Yi would come, she had to get information about Lu Ye's arrival as soon as possible. The mermaid who left was going to inform her. Sure enough, a moment later, Lu rushed over and shouted from afar, "Li Tai Bai." Lu Yi looked in the direction of the voice and saw her with a happy smile. She rushed in front of him, her fish tail wagging non-stop. "There's not much time, so I'll make a long story short. I brought some things for you. Also, if there's anything you want, remember to tell me the next time I come and I'll buy it." Saying so, Lu Yi took out all the spirit pills he had purchased from the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce, sorted them into categories, and handed over a dozen storage rings to Lu. "What are these?" Lu took them in a daze. "They're all spirit pills that can be bought outside." "So many? It's too precious." Lu was touched. "You're right." She thought Lu Yi was just coming over to take a look, but she didn't expect him to bring so many things. The Merfolk clan had already experienced the wonders of spirit pills before. Whether it was healing or cultivation, they were greatly beneficial. However, the number of spirit pills Lu Yi had exchanged for last time was not many, and there were only a few types, so the Merfolk clan treated them like treasures. "You can use them as much as you want, I'll buy more when I'm done. Don't save them." After saying so, Lu Yi didn't stay and waved his hand. "I'll be leaving first, I'll come back next time." He turned around and stepped into the door, his figure disappearing. "When's the next time?" Lu shouted, but there was no response. She couldn't help but slap the floor with her fishtail, making a thump. The 2 mermaids trembled at the side, feeling that the princess was in a bad mood. Taking the several storage rings that Lu Yi had given her, Lu returned unhappily. With so many spirit dawn, she had to hand them over to the elders to deal with. Moreover, Lu Yi had also said that if the Merfolk clan needed anything, she could tell him the next time he came, but she really didn't know what the clan needed. Lu Yi had already returned to the cave where he was hiding. This time he didn't talk to the Merfolk clan about the trade. Firstly, there wasn't enough time. He couldn't wait for the Merfolk clan to gather enough spirit jades before returning. Secondly, the Merfolk clan wasn't an ungrateful race. He had sent so many spirit pills, so the Merfolk clan would definitely return the favor. This could be seen from the previous 2 transactions. So the next time he went, the Merfolk clan would most likely prepare enough spirit jades as a reward. Of course, even if they didn't, it didn't matter. It would be convenient for him to do anything in the future if he maintained contact with the Merfolk clan. The minor constellation hall had been settled down. Lu Yi couldn't leave for the time being because he wanted to see if his idea could succeed, so he had to stay here for a while. Just as he was about to continue comprehending the inheritance in the knife, he suddenly felt some movement outside. Then a familiar voice sounded in his ears, "Sister, there's a cave here. Why didn't I see it the last time I came?" Another familiar voice sounded, "The spiritual island on the Vientiane Sea is the creation of heaven and earth. There's nothing strange about a cave. Such a deserted island must be uninhabited. Let's go in and have a look." While speaking, the sound of clothes fluttering came out. Then, the person who spoke first said in surprise, "Sister, there's a tactical formation here. Someone's here." The sister was slightly surprised. She was about to take her sister out. Suddenly, there was a change in front of her. The tactical formation broke by itself. Then, a figure sitting cross-legged appeared in the eyes of the 2 sisters. 6 eyes met. The 2 sisters were slightly stunned because they found that they had seen this person before. It was the person who looked like senior brother Fa from the back, as Dumbo said. At the bottom of the cave, Lu Yi looked at the 2 sisters faintly. He didn't know what they were doing here. Just now, there was a tactical formation blocking, and he had just returned from the Merfolk clan. He didn't feel carefully, so the two sisters didn't notice him until they were in front of him. On the Vientiane Sea, when such unfamiliar cultivators suddenly met face to face, they would inevitably have a certain degree of vigilance. But the Xingyue sisters didn't seem to have much vigilance against Lu Yi. After seeing Lu Ye's face clearly, the two sisters hurriedly bowed. Saixing said, "Sorry to disturb you. We didn't mean to offend you. Please don't blame us." With that said, the two sisters slowly left the room. Lu Yi sat there without moving. After they left, Lu Yi frowned and stood up. He flew out of the cave and hovered in the air. After a careful look, he frowned even more. Because in the short time he stayed in the Merfolk clan's territory, many people came to this deserted island. And it seemed that, from the looks of it, these people seemed to be building a foundation on this deserted island. They definitely didn't come up with this idea on the spur of the moment, but had planned for a long time. In other words, someone had been eyeing this deserted island for a long time and was ready to use this place as their base. As for the leader, when he saw the Xingyue sisters, Lu Yi had some guesses. At this moment it was true. Who else could it be but Chu Shen? Lu Yi just remembered that this guy sent a message to him a few days ago, saying that he led people to occupy a spiritual island and wanted to invite him to guard it. Lu Yi thought it was troublesome and ignored him. From the looks of it, wasn't this the one that this fellow was occupying? How was this a spiritual island? It was clearly a deserted island that no one cared about. In addition to Chu Shen, Little Dumb, Crooked Teeth and Lucky Star who he saw last time were all there. There were also more than a dozen constellations that Lu Yi didn't know. He didn't know where Chu Shen found these people, but looking at their spiritual power fluctuations, they were just at the early stage of the constellation. They were busy. At this moment, the Xingyue sisters came to Chu Shen and were talking to him. Chu Shen turned his head and looked at Lu Yi, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Meeting his gaze, Lu Yi was annoyed. He couldn't wait to pull this guy to a place where no one was around and beat him until his mother couldn't recognize him. There were so many deserted islands on the Vientiane Sea. Why did this guy choose the same one as him? Chapter 1472. Just as Lu Yi was having a headache, Chu Shen came over with a smile and a warm attitude. He cupped his hands from afar. Chu Shen from Domineering Palace greets brother. Domineering Palace? Lu Yi frowned slightly. What kind of stupid name was that? Was he not afraid of being beaten up when he went out? Chu Shen's eyebrows danced. Domineering as in domineering. Lu Yi pretended not to understand such a blatant hint. Anyway, as long as he did not admit it, no one would treat him as Fa Wuzuan. Chu Shen knew the sensitivity of Fa Wuzuan's identity. Although he was sure that the person in front of him was SPHYNX, if SPHYNX did not admit it, he would not expose it. The only thing he didn't understand was why the SPHYNX would appear here so coincidentally. He had sent a message to invite the SPHYNX over, but the SPHYNX didn't respond. He thought that it was all over, but he didn't expect to meet him here today. This time he could not miss it no matter what. He knew how strong SPHYNX was. If he was here, the strength of Domineering Palace would definitely increase by a lot. He was not in a hurry to express his attitude. Chu Shen knew that SPHYNX was not easy to get along with. If he was too anxious, it would be bad. He politely said, "How should I address you?" He really did not know SPHYNX's name. After all, Fa Wuzuan was just an alias. Lu Yi glanced at him lightly. "Li Tai Bai. So it's Senior Li, Chu Shen greets you. What are you doing?" Lu Yi asked. Although he already had a guess, he still had to ask clearly. Chu Shen said, "It's like this, Senior Li. Domineering Palace has decided to make this place our base. If Senior Li is interested, change to another place." Before Chu Shen could finish, Lu Yi interrupted him. He still had to wait here for the power of the minor constellation palace to ferment. How could he let others cause trouble here? Moreover, there were so many deserted islands in the Wanxiang Sea. Other than this place, Chu Shen had many other choices. There was no need for it to be here. Chu Shen was stunned and immediately looked at Lu Yi pitifully. If it was someone else who spoke to him like this, he would have already called Xiao Dai and the rest over to form a formation. But SPNX had spoken, he did not dare to refute. "Do you have any objections?" Lu Yi looked at him. Chu Shen quickly said, "No, no, no. How could I have any objections? I'll change to Senior Li. Then Senior Li, I'll leave now? Go." Chu Shen clasped his fists and left. But after a few steps, Lu Ye's voice came from behind. "Wait." Chu Shen turned around. "Senior brother, do you have any other orders?" Lu Yi remained silent. Initially, he thought that he should wait for the minor constellation hall to grow in power and not allow anyone to disturb him. However, if his idea could really be realized, then this deserted island would slowly become a spiritual island. Once it became a spiritual island, it would definitely attract the attention of others. By then, even if Chu Shen did not come, others would come. On the other hand, if Chu Shen occupied this place in advance, he might be able to reduce some of the trouble and control the situation within his control. After all, Chu Shen was the young master of the chariot industry. He also had Jiu Yan as his backer. Even though Ba Qi Palace was just established and did not have a strong foundation, not many people would dare to cause trouble for them. Chu Shen's name itself was a layer of protection. Thinking about it this way, allowing Chu Shen's domineering palace to occupy this place did not seem to be a bad thing. On the contrary, there were some benefits. Senior apprentice brother? Chu Shen saw that Lu Yi did not speak and did not know what he wanted to do. After a while, Lu Yi made a decision and said, "This place will be Ba Qi Palace's territory in the future, but I have a request." Chu Shen looked solemn. "Senior apprentice brother, please tell me." Lu Yi pointed at the location of the cave where he stayed before. "That piece of land belongs to me." Chu Shen was stunned and was overjoyed. "No problem." He thought to himself, not to mention that piece of land, even if you wanted the entire island there would be no problem. Boss Fa was still reliable. He obviously agreed to his previous suggestion and was prepared to stay and guard Ba Qi Island. However, Boss Fa did not make it clear so he could pretend that he did not know anything. He was in a good mood. Currently, Ba Qi Palace did not have many people. Other than Xiao Dai, Crooked Tooth, and the others, the rest of the people were people he recruited from Zhaolai Island with spiritual jades. These people naturally did not have much loyalty, and their strength was not high because the conditions that Chu Shen could offer were not good. Lu Yi felt that he had the support of Che Ling Boundary and Jiu Yan, so he did not have to worry about food and clothing and spiritual jades. However, in reality he had an agreement with Jiu Yan. When he was outside, he could not use Jiu Yan and Che Ling Boundary's name to do things. Jiu Yan would also not provide him with material support. The spiritual jades that he was spending now were the 500,000 that Lu Yi had given him after the auction. Currently, Ba Qi Palace had less than 20 people, and all of them were in the early stage of constellation. With Lu Yi, their combat power in the constellation realm was guaranteed. However, if a force wanted to establish a foothold on the Vientiane Sea, it would be impossible without Yu Yao. However, no one would spend time and effort to attack such a deserted island, so it did not matter whether Yu Yao was there or not. The group of people from Ba Qi Palace was busy on the island. Lu Yi looked at them for a while and shook his head helplessly. He returned to his cave and continued to comprehend the saber technique inheritance. After comprehending for a while and using some treasures to recover his damaged divine thought, Lu Yi activated the power of the talent tree and began to deduce the concealment spiritual pattern. This was a time-consuming process and it was important to work slowly. Therefore, whenever Lu Yi was free, he would deduce the concealment spiritual pattern. However, this was the first time Lu Yi had made a deduction since the talent tree had changed 3 times. Soon Lu Yi noticed something unusual. The efficiency of the deduction this time seemed to be much faster than before. Moreover, he could actually control the efficiency of the deduction. This discovery made Lu Yi overjoyed. This was because all along, it took a long time to deduce a new spiritual pattern. It basically took half a year to deduce it. Since the talent tree had changed 2 times, he had only deduced a total of 4 new spiritual patterns. They were the Void, Divine Blade, Divine Guard, and New Spirit-Connected Branch. He also wanted to increase the speed and efficiency of the talent tree's deduction, but unfortunately he did not know how to do it. It was only after the talent tree had changed 3 times that the talent tree seemed to have this ability. During the deduction, the speed at which the yin and yang lines changed on the talent tree's leaves was much faster than before. Under his control, the efficiency could be even faster. He was overjoyed. As expected, the talent tree had other effects after the 3 changes. Previously, he only sensed that the power to burn foreign objects could be used on others. He had a feeling that this was not the only effect after the 3 changes. Now, it seemed that his previous guess was right. It was just that he had not been able to deduce the spiritual pattern and had not noticed it. However, Lu Yi soon realized that something was wrong. As the talent tree continued to deduce, the stored fuel was rapidly depleted. Although the rate of depletion was not as fast as when he went deep into the Wanxiang Sea, it was still extremely fast. The more Lu Yi increased the efficiency of the deduction, the faster the talent tree's fuel would be depleted. He was speechless. It turned out that there was a price to pay for increasing the efficiency of the deduction, and this price was the consumption of fuel. Initially, Lu Yi had replenished the talent tree with a large amount of fuel last time. He thought that as long as he did not go deep into the Wanxiang Sea to cultivate, it would be able to last for many years. However, it seemed that this hope was going to be dashed. If he wanted to deduce new spiritual patterns quickly, he would have to consume a large amount of fuel. It was the same logic as his cultivation, using resources in exchange for time. However, in general, this change in the talent tree was a good thing for Lu Yi. This was because there were many spiritual patterns that he had to deduce again. Based on the calculation of at least half a year for each spiritual pattern, it would be impossible to deduce all of them without at least a few decades. However, as long as he had enough fuel, this time could be greatly reduced. Although Lu Yi was helpless, he still chose to do so. To him, time was very precious. If the fuel was depleted, he could still buy it with spirit jades. It was not a big deal. On Tyrannical Aura Island, the construction of Tyrannical Aura Palace was in full swing. Some new constellations were recruited to join in. In fact, these constellations did not understand why Chu Xin chose such a place to build his base. It was because it was meaningless. Even if they forcefully occupied such a deserted island, there was no practical value. However, they were all recruited and received a fixed monthly salary. They only needed to do their own things and did not have to worry so much. Chu Xin would occasionally visit Lu Yi, but Lu Yi basically rejected him. He was busy deducing spiritual patterns and comprehending saber techniques. How could he have the time to see him? Chu Xin did not care about it. Until one day when he came to visit again, Lu Yi did not reject him and let him in. In the cave, Chu Xin was very surprised. He did not stand on ceremony because he believed that Li Tai-bai in front of him was the pharaoh. Naturally, he was not so particular. He took out the wine and dishes that he brought, sat opposite Lu Yi and drank, chatting casually. Lu Yi also knew why Dumbo and the others were with him. It was because those girls had nowhere to go. Chu Xin deliberately found them and drew them to his side by drawing a beautiful pie for them. Of course, it was mainly because of Fa Wuzuan as a link. Otherwise, those girls would not be able to get on Chu Xin's boat so easily. What are you going to do after occupying such a deserted island? Lu Yi asked. Chu Xin scratched his head. I don't know. It's just that I was not free in the Carbell world. I have nothing to do after coming out. I can't rely on others, so I want to form a team and see if I can do something. At least I want to make a name for myself. In the future, when I stand out, others will not say that I am the young master of the Carbell world, but the palace master of Tyrannical Palace. After all, Chu Xin was still young. He did things on impulse without much consideration. He looked at Lu Yi and said, Senior brother, have you taught me? Lu Yi held the wine cup and said lightly, the name of Tyrannical Palace doesn't sound good. If others said so, Chu Xin would treat it as nonsense. But the pharaoh must have a reason for saying so. He kept nodding, yes, I think so too. Then Senior brother, give it a name? Chapter 1473. Lu Yi downed the wine in his cup and rubbed the cup lightly with his fingers. He pondered for a moment and said, Unparalleled then. This place will be called Unparalleled Island from now on. Chu Xin shook his head. Unique in the world, unparalleled in the world. He gave Lu Yi a thumbs up. Good name. I'll listen to Senior brother. From now on, this will be Unparalleled Island. Lu Yi did not comment on his bottomless bootlicking. The reason why he took the name Wushuang, Lu Yi actually had his own considerations because his current identity was announced to the outside world as Li Tai-bai of the Wushuang continent. If the minor constellation palace hall could transform this deserted island into a spiritual island, then in the future he could find an opportunity to bring all the people from the 9 prefectures over and let them cultivate here. With the name Wushuang, it would make them feel closer to him. Second, don't recruit ordinary constellations anymore, Lu Yi said. There were already more than 20 people recruited from Unparalleled Island. However, these people did not have a sense of belonging or identity with the Unparalleled Palace. No matter how many people there were, it was useless. Moreover, their strength was not high. These people were more than enough to build the foundation of the Unparalleled Palace. Chu Xin nodded. Senior brother is right. We've stopped recruiting. I've asked Lucky Star to keep an eye out for Yu Yao on Zhaolei Island. Unfortunately, there has been no news. It would be strange if there was news. Which Yu Yao would be willing to come to such a deserted place? Yu Yao were the mainstays of the various spiritual islands on the Thousand Manifestation Sea. The unparalleled palace had just started. They had no strength and no reputation. Naturally, no one would be willing to come. Moreover, the monthly salary that Chu Xin could offer would not be too high. Third, set up the formation on the island as soon as possible. Chu Xin was stunned. However, he agreed readily. I'll arrange it. Originally, he had planned to build the foundation of the Peerless Island first. As for the formation, it didn't seem to matter whether it existed or not. After all, it was a deserted island and no one would attack it. What was the use of a formation? It would be a waste of spiritual jades. However, since the pharaoh had said so, he could only do as he was told. Senior brother, do you have any other instructions? Chu Xin asked. Lu Yi shook his head. No. Then I'll take my leave. Chu Xin stood up and said goodbye. Just as he turned around, he heard Lu Ye's voice behind him. You left something behind. Chu Xin was startled and hurriedly turned his head to look. He saw that there was indeed an additional item in front of where he had been sitting. When he saw what it was, he was overjoyed. This treasure cannot be lost. Thank you, senior brother. He hurriedly bent down to pick it up and walked out of the cave to take a closer look. Sure enough, it was a twin chi and branches array disc. His heart was filled with joy. Previously, he had asked Jiu Yen for a twin chi connected spirit array disc, but it had been cut off by Lu Yi. Now, it was obviously impossible for him to ask for a second one. He had been worried about where to find another one, but now he had one. How could he not know that the SPNX pharaoh had purposely given it to him as a form of compensation? Array discs were created by SPNX, so he naturally had a lot of them. Senior brother Chu. Crooked Teeth Chow suddenly came up to greet him. Chu Xin put away the disc array and looked towards her. Seeing Crooked Teeth's expression seemed to be a little excited, he did not know what good thing she encountered and hurriedly asked, "What's wrong?" Crooked Teeth Chow said, "Senior brother Chu, feel it carefully. See if there is any difference between here and a few days ago?" Chu Xin did not understand, but still immersed his mind and carefully felt it. After a moment, his expression could not help but become serious. He looked at Crooked Teeth Chow with incomparable astonishment and said in surprise, "Starry sky energy?" Crooked Teeth Chow fiercely nodded, "Yes, starry sky energy." Chu Xin's eyes widened and looked around. It can't be. His luck could not be so good, right? He randomly chose a deserted island that no one cared about and it actually turned into a living place? There were many islands on the Wanxiang Sea. Generally, they were divided into two types: spirit islands and deserted islands. Spirit islands were generally islands with starry sky energy. Deserted islands were islands without starry sky energy. Putting aside the deserted islands for now, other than being a place for cultivators to stay, they had no value. But there were good and bad spirit islands. Some spirit islands did not have rich starry sky energy and could not even satisfy the most basic cultivation of cultivators. Because the starry sky energy was very thin, but some good spirit islands not only had rich starry sky energy, they could even breed spirit jade mines. And these higher quality spirit islands were all occupied by the top forces or galaxies. Ordinary people could not interfere at all. But spirit islands and deserted islands were not unchanging. Some spirit islands did not know why the starry sky energy dissipated and the spirit veins dried up. On the contrary, some deserted islands suddenly burst with vitality. Under the circumstances that no one knew, starry sky energy was born and slowly turned into spirit islands. This process of turning a deserted island into a spirit island was called turning into a living place by cultivators. It was like being reborn from death. Chu Xin could be sure that Wushuang Island did not have any starry sky energy before. But today, after careful sensing, he actually felt the existence of starry sky energy. Although it was very thin, it was undoubtedly starry sky energy. This was obviously a sign that the deserted island was turning into a living place. His heart trembled. If that was the case, then this deserted island was not a worthless place. Although he did not know how far it would turn into a living place, as long as it was related to a spirit island, it had great value. Suddenly, he remembered the three things that Pharaoh Da instructed him to do. The last one was to quickly set up a large formation on the island. He did not understand why Pharaoh Da instructed him to do so. But now, it seemed that Pharaoh Da had already sensed the subtle changes in Wushuang Island. Setting up a large formation in advance could prevent the starry sky energy from dissipating. Secondly, it could prevent external enemies from coveting the island. If Wushuang Island was just a deserted island, there was naturally no need to consider these. But it was turning into a living place, there was no need to consider more. Feroda was indeed far-sighted. Thinking about it, Chu Shen asked in a low voice, "Other than you, who else sensed it?" Crooked Mouse said, "Everyone should have sensed it." Chu Shen thought about it and agreed. Constellation realm cultivators were very sensitive to starry sky energy. He did not sense it previously mainly because the starry sky energy was still very thin and he did not sense it carefully. Others would be able to sense it if they paid attention. Call junior sister Xiao Dai and the Xingyu sisters. Set up the large formation on the island first. Everything else can be delayed. Chu Shen quickly instructed. Crooked Mouse also knew that this was a serious matter. He immediately nodded and turned to leave. Obviously he was preparing to set up the formation. Chu Shen stayed where he was. Suddenly he felt a blissful worry. If Wushuang Island was really turning into a spirit island, Wushuang Palace would definitely not be able to protect it. Even with Feroda guarding it, it would not be enough. Although Feroda was powerful, he was still alone. Hence he still needed to recruit people. However, he did not need those at the early stage of Constellation Realm. He had to find people with power and influence. He took out a musical note and sent a message to Lucky Star, who was guarding Zhaolai Island, to give him some instructions. At the same time, Lu Yi also took out his own musical note and sent a message out. "You there?" The other party replied quickly. "If you have something to say, say it. If not, I will not chat. I am very busy." After not seeing him for so many days, the old man's temper had risen. Moreover, what could this old man possibly do? Even though his cultivation was mediocre, he didn't have much lifespan left. Anyone could tell with a single glance that Yu Yao wouldn't be able to make a name for herself on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Therefore, Lu Yi reckoned that Yu Yao would still be wandering around after arriving here. No force would be willing to accept him. "I will find something for you to do. Go to Zhaolai Island and find a woman from Wushuang Island who looks weak and delicate. Tell her that you are willing to be recruited. Well, if you can't find Wushuang Island, find Domineering Qi Island." Tang Jun replied, "I am very busy every day. I am so busy that I can't split myself. Do I need you to find something for me to do? What, Wushuang Island or Domineering Qi Island? I have never heard of them. I will not go." "Then don't regret it. I am afraid that the Qingli Taoist world will not have a share of the good things here in the future." Lu Yi finished speaking and kept his musical note. Somewhere in the Wanxiang Sea, Tang Jun, who was flying in the starry sky, immediately stopped. If Li Taibai had said something trivial, he would not have cared at all. If he had found the way home, he would have cared. However, if he had brought up the Qingli Taoist world, he could not help but be concerned. He could not figure out what good things Li Taibai was talking about. Tang Jun could not help but send a message to ask, but there was no reply. Tang Jun cursed angrily. He took out the star map, found the location of Zhaolai Island and sped towards it. Since he had nothing to do, it was not a big deal to go and take a look. He thought that Li Taibai would not fool him about such things. Even if he was fooled, he could just leave directly. There was no loss. He hurried to Zhaolai Island and saw a large number of cultivators gathered there. Many of them had signs in front of or beside them. It was a dazzling sight. Tang Jun had been here a few times before and had been recruited. However, when they saw that he was so old and did not seem to have many years left to live, they all rejected him. This made him feel rather sad. Lu Ye's guess was right. Ever since he came to the Wanxiang Sea, Tang Jun had been in a state of idleness. He was not involved in the opening of the Constellation Hall, and he could not get involved in Yu Yao's affairs. He was extremely bored. He thought of the Peerless Island or Domineering Aura Island as he searched among the crowd. After a while, he saw a delicate-looking woman. The sign beside her was the recruitment notice for Domineering Aura Island. At this moment, this weak-looking woman was talking to another petite woman. Tang Jun walked forward and heard that the two of them were talking about the rewards for being recruited. He stood quietly at the side and waited. After a while, the two women finished their discussion. The delicate-looking woman looked very happy. Lucky Star had already noticed Tang Jun. He turned around and looked at him. "Is there something you need?" Tang Jun stroked his beard with one hand and pointed at the sign beside her. "I'm here for this." As he spoke, he slightly circulated his spiritual power. Yu Yao's mid-stage cultivation was clearly visible. Lucky Star was stunned. She had never thought that she would be so lucky one day. She had just received Chu Shen's message and changed the recruitment notice, and not only did she immediately attract a late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator, she even had Yu Yao deliver herself to her doorstep. End of chapter. Chapter 1474. When the Constellation Hall first opened, although the Lucky Star's name had been given to her, in reality she had nothing to do with luck. Instead, she had been plagued with bad luck. The main reason she had chosen this name was to ward off bad luck and see if it could change her bad luck. However, it was not very effective. Until today, a late-stage Constellation senior martial sister had been recruited, and now Yu Yao. The Lucky Star's eyes were slightly moist. "Senior, are you really here because you were recruited?" "Of course." Tang Jun nodded. The Lucky Star did not dare to be negligent. He displayed his utmost sincerity and began to negotiate with Tang Jun. He had thought that Yu Yao's conditions would be difficult to satisfy, but who would have thought that she did not have any special requirements? She accepted all the conditions he offered. For a moment, the Lucky Star was at a loss. On the other hand, the late-stage Constellation senior martial sister, who was watching from the side, seemed to have sensed something. After the negotiations were over, the Lucky Star put away his tablet. "Gentlemen, I'll bring you to Tyrannical Aura Island." In the past, the Lucky Star had told the early-stage Constellation Masters to find the island by themselves. However, the two people he had recruited this time were different. In order to show his sincerity, he immediately decided to personally lead the way. After leaving Leah Island, Tang Jun immediately summoned his planetary boat when he saw the Lucky Star about to fly over. The Lucky Star landed on it with a red face. Tang Jun was very fast. In less than half a day, they had arrived at Peerless Island. The Lucky Star had already explained the situation on the way back. At this moment, Chu Shen was waiting on the island to welcome them. When he saw that the newcomers were indeed a late-stage Constellation senior martial sister and Yu Yao, he secretly gestured to the Lucky Star that he had done well. He stepped forward and bowed. They greeted each other and introduced themselves. After that, Chu Shen led Tang Jun and the petite woman to walk around the island, explaining his future plans and grand plans. The two of them listened in silence, not making any comments. Although Peerless Island was not small, they finished touring it quickly. Chu Shen was a little nervous. He did not know if the conditions he offered were enough to tempt the two of them to stay. If not, then everything he had done so far would have been for nothing. "If the two of you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will not hide anything from you. The unparalleled palace has only just started, and the conditions are indeed a little crude. However, I believe that as long as everyone works together with me, the unparalleled palace will definitely have a voice in the Wanxiang Sea in the future." Tang Jun shook his head slightly. This old man is old, and old Qin has seen a lot of things. This place of new life is full of life. From his words, it was obvious that he was willing to stay. Chu Shen's expression lit up when he heard this. He looked at the petite girl who called herself Bansi. For some reason, even though this was his first time meeting this woman, Chu Shen felt that the pressure she gave him was even greater than that of Tang Jun. Half-Ci smiled. "I only have one question. Senior sister, please speak." Chu Shen's expression turned solemn. "The junior sister who called me here said that this is Tyrannical Aura Island, and you are called Tyrannical Palace. But from your introduction, why is this unparalleled island and unparalleled palace?" Chu Shen heaved a sigh of relief and explained, "I felt that the two words unparalleled sounded better than tyrannical, so I changed it." Half-Ci glanced at him and nodded slightly. She did not ask any more questions and said, "Even though this spiritual island has just started to show signs of life, but if this continues, the future is not bad. This kind of spiritual island is rare. Everyone says that it is unintentional to add flowers to brocade. It is only through providing charcoal and snowy weather that one can see love. I am willing to stay and overcome this difficulty with the Palace Master. I only hope that when the Palace Master achieves great success in the future, you will not forget about my efforts." Chu Shen was elated. "I will definitely not forget. I am here to thank Senior Sister Bansi and Senior Tang." Half-Ci pursed her lips and smiled. "Since we are on the same side, if there is anything you need help with, just give the order." Chu Shen said, "There is no need to trouble the two of you with other trivial matters. However, we are preparing to set up the formation on the island. I wonder if the two of you are familiar with formations?" Half-Ci said, "I know a little." Tang Jun nodded too. "I know a little. Then I will ask the two of you to set up the formation." Chu Shen opened his mouth and suddenly thought of something. "Alright, if the two of you have nothing to do, try not to go over there." Half-Ci glanced over and could not help but be surprised. "What is so special about that place?" Chu Shen said, "That is where a very important guest of mine stays. He likes peace and quiet and does not like to be disturbed." Tang Jun's eyes flashed. Ever since he came here, he had been wondering why he did not see Li Taibai. Now he knew that Li Taibai was hiding there. He could not help but curse silently. This rascal, he brought me here but hid at the side. What was the reason for this? Half Ci also looked in that direction with interest. Tang Jun was not in a hurry to find Lu Yi. Instead, he started to set up the formation on Wushuang Island with Half Ci and Crooked Teeth Little. When he said that he had dabbled in the art of arrays, he was undoubtedly being humble. For someone like him who had lived for so many years but had yet to reach the upper level of cultivation, he would start to ponder about some unorthodox ways to pass the time. In terms of the art of arrays, he was undoubtedly an expert. Setting up an array on a spiritual island wasn't too difficult for him. Crooked Teeth Little's level of formations was not enough in front of him. But what made Tang Jun feel surprised was that the girl called Half Ci's formations were not low either. Every small change actually made him feel enlightened. Just based on this point, Half Ci's attainment in formations was even higher than his. Tang Jun couldn't help but sigh. After coming to Wushuang Island for a few days, Tang Jun finally found a chance to go to the cave where Lu Yi was. One old and one young, after almost a year they were reunited. In a year's time, there was not much change in their appearances. But after seeing Lu Yi, Tang Jun was shocked. What happened to your cultivation? He almost suspected that he had sensed wrongly. Because in terms of spiritual power waves, Li Taibai had already reached the later stage of Constellation Realm. How was this possible? When he first met Li Taibai, he was only at the early stage of Constellation Realm. With the help of a red talisman, he killed Qin Yuandai and almost destroyed her family. After that, he chased after them. The two of them were swept into the worm path and came to the Vientiane galaxy. At that time, Li Taibai had advanced to the middle stage of Constellation Realm. Tang Jun was not surprised because he did not know how long Li Taibai had been at the early stage. He only thought that he was at the critical point of advancing to the middle stage. But it had only been 1.5 years since the two of them came to the Vientiane galaxy. 1.5 years to advance from the middle stage of Constellation Realm to the late stage? That was simply a fantasy. But the truth was right in front of him. After sensing carefully, Li Taibai was indeed at the late stage of Constellation Realm. Even though Tang Jun had lived for many years and had seen many things, he was still shocked beyond words. The advancement of a realm was nothing, but Tang Jun knew that Li Taibai not only had a realm, but also had the ability to kill enemies of a higher realm. When he was at the early stage of Constellation Realm, he had killed Zhao Tianmu and forced him to flee back to the Qingli Dao world. Now that he was at the late stage of Constellation Realm, did it mean that he could even fight Yu Yao? Unparalleled Li Taibai was indeed unparalleled in the world. If such a person did not die, there would definitely be a place for him in this vast galaxy in the future. Tang Jun suddenly felt that he should carefully examine his relationship with this lad. He could not simply treat him as a junior. After taking a deep breath and calming himself down, Tang Jun said, "You were the one who supported the unparalleled palace. Otherwise, why would he specially call him here?" Lu Yi shook his head. "Not really, it's just a coincidence. I roughly understand why you called me here. This spiritual island is in the process of reincarnation. If it continues, it will definitely be a good place. You want me to occupy a place here in advance. In the future, if people from your world and mine come here, they will have a place to stay, right?" "That's what I was thinking." Tang Jun shook his head and said, "That's a good idea. But let's not talk about the fact that we can't find the way back. Even if we find it and bring people from our world here, how can you be sure that the palace master of the unparalleled palace will accept them and let them stay here? If this place really becomes a good spiritual island, there will definitely be countless people scrambling for it. By then it won't be easy to come in again." Lu Yi said, "You don't have to worry about this. I can still guarantee this." His words should still be effective on Chu Shin's side. Taking a step back, even if it didn't work, he could still make use of the minor constellation hall to build another spiritual island. Now, everyone thought that it was the unparalleled island that was reincarnating. But in reality, it was the minor constellation hall that was working. With this treasure in hand, Lu Yi could reincarnate any deserted island he wanted. Tang Jun did not know the relationship between Chu Shen and Lu Yi. However, Chu Shen had previously said that this was the place where a very important guest of his stayed. From the looks of it, the relationship between the two of them should not be simple. He pondered for a while and said slowly, "If you want me to stay here, I can do that. But I have a condition." Lu Yi rolled his eyes and looked at him. He wanted to ignore him. However, on second thought, to what extent the minor constellation hall could transform the unparalleled island, he needed a long time to observe. Yu Yao was not easy to find. Tang Jun was the only person he could find and trust. With Tang Jun here they could avoid a lot of trouble. Even if they were attacked they would still have the ability to fight back. Therefore for the time being he really had to appease him. I need a quota for the cultivators of the Qingli Dao world to enter the unparalleled continent to cultivate at a fixed time. Lu Yi looked at him with a strange expression. The cultivators of the Qingli Dao world want to enter the unparalleled continent to cultivate? Why is that? It was not that they could not go to the unparalleled continent, but what could they cultivate there? The corpse clan was rampant everywhere. In the future, the foundation of the unparalleled continent was bound to be swallowed by the 9 states. When that time came, the foundation of the world would decline and sooner or later, it would become an ordinary world without a cultivation environment. Therefore, Lu Yi did not understand the purpose of Tang Jun's condition. Chapter 1475. There's something wrong with the Qingli Dao world. Tang Jun did not intend to hide it. It was not a secret, and if Li Taibai agreed to his terms, he would not be able to hide it. After his explanation, Lu Yi finally understood what Tang Jun wanted to do. It had been almost 2,000 years since the Qingli Dao world was promoted to a large realm. Qin Yuandai and Tang Jun, who were killed by him, were considered the first batch of people to benefit from it. As their realm was promoted, they broke through to the constellation and slowly grew to the Yu Yao realm. However, after so many years, although there were many constellations in the Qingli Dao world, no one else was promoted to the Yu Yao realm. Something was obviously wrong. After Tang Jun and Qin Yuandai, only Wuxia was promoted to the Yu Yao realm. However, Wuxia was able to do so because he had participated in the Battle of the Deity Ocean at the Reincarnation Tree. He survived the Battle of the Deity Ocean and obtained the opportunity to be promoted to the constellation, so his cultivation path was smooth. Since many years ago, Tang Jun had sensed the problem of this realm. Unfortunately, he did not know the cause until one day, when an expert passed by the Qingli Dao world and gave him some pointers. Tang Jun then realized the truth. According to the expert, there was something wrong with the Qingli Dao world. Therefore, after cultivators were promoted to the constellation, no matter how talented they were, they could not break through to the Yu Yao realm. In other words, cultivators who obtained the opportunity to be promoted in the Qingli Dao world could only cultivate to the later stage of the constellation. The Qingli Dao world was not the only realm like this in the galaxy. There were other similar realms, but there were not many of them. To solve this problem, the only way was to send their cultivators to other realms to cultivate and break through. This way they would have a chance to go further. This was also the reason why Tang Jun had followed Qin Yuandai to the Wuxia continent. At that time, he thought that if he could take over the Wuxia continent, then the cultivators in this realm would have a way out. However, he did not expect Qin Yuandai to be killed by a red talisman. In the process of chasing after Lu Yi, he was swept into the worm path and ended up in the Wanxiang galaxy. Now that Lu Yi had a favor to ask of him and the two of them were in the same boat, Tang Jun felt that Li Taibai would not refuse such a small request. Of course, Lu Yi would not refuse, but he had a strange expression. Are you sure you want to send your cultivators to the Wuxia continent to cultivate? Tang Jun said, this old man doesn't need many quotas. 1 person per year. This isn't too much, right? If they really wanted to release them, they would definitely choose cultivators with outstanding talent who had the potential to become Yu Yao. There could not be too many of them, so 1 person per year was definitely enough to satisfy the needs of the Qingli Dao world. It was equivalent to taking up another person's opportunity to be promoted to a constellation. Not at all. Lu Yi nodded. Not to mention 1 person per year, even if it were 10 or 100 people, it would not matter. The Wuxia continent itself was not a good place. His roots were in the 9 states, but there was no need to tell Tang Junyan about this. As for how Tang Jun was going to explain to him when he found out the truth, that was a matter for the future. After the two of them reached an agreement, Tang Jun said happily, if we can find the way back, we can join forces with the Jade Conch. We can definitely occupy a place on the Vientiane Sea. It was difficult to establish a place on the Vientiane Sea with just the Qingli Dao world and the 9 states. There were only 2 Yu Yao in the Qingli Dao world and none in the 9 states. Therefore, if they really wanted a place on the Vientiane Sea, they had to borrow the power of the Jade Conch. Since they came from the same galaxy, they had to act as a team. This was how many weak galaxies survived on the Vientiane Sea. Do you have any leads on the way back? Lu Yi asked. Tang Jun shook his head. I have paid attention to it, but unfortunately, there were no valuable clues. I also went to the insect path a few days ago. It was still a mess. It looks like it won't be stabilized in a short period of time. Speaking of this, Tang Jun sighed helplessly. The galaxy was too big and there were many galaxies. The Jade Conch was remote and unknown. No one had heard of it unless they crossed paths with the Jade Conch. Trying to find out information about the Jade Conch in an environment like the Vientiane Sea was like looking for a needle in a haystack. The old man and the young man were no longer in the mood to chat. Tang Jun quickly left. Not long after Tang Jun left, Lu Yi felt that the restriction he set at the entrance of the cave was disturbed again. This disturbance was not malicious. It was like someone was knocking on the door. Obviously, someone was here to visit. He frowned slightly and used his divine telekinesis to investigate. He found that the person standing at the entrance of the cave was a very petite woman. He had never seen her before. However, someone who would appear on the Peerless Island at this time should be someone recruited by Chu Xin. Her cultivation was not bad. She was in the late stage of the constellation realm. Lu Yi did not know why she was here. He thought about it and opened the restriction. The woman stepped inside. Soon she was in front of Lu Yi. In the dim environment, the woman sized him up with a pair of big bright eyes. She seemed to be curious. What's the matter? Lu Yi asked. The woman shook her head and said, You must be Palace Master Chu's friend? My name is Bansi. I was recruited by Palace Master Chu. I will be living on the Peerless Island from now on. She acted as if she was familiar with him. Lu Yi was confused. He had no idea what she wanted to do. Bansi asked again, What's your name? Lu Yi thought about it and said his name, Li Tai Bai. Bansi nodded slightly. I will remember it. After she finished speaking, she turned around and walked away leisurely with her hands behind her back. This woman, what was she doing? However, Lu Yi guessed that she was just curious about who was living here, so she came to take a look. It was normal. After Bansi left, Lu Yi took out a musical note. He had 2 musical notes in his hand. One belonged to Li Tai Bai and the other belonged to Fa Wuzuan. There were not many people he could contact on Fa Wuzuan's musical note. He was going to contact Spectre. During this period of time, with the help of the Talent Tree's 3 transformations, he had finished deducing the new concealment spirit pattern. Now, there was an additional spirit pattern on the burning leaf of the Talent Tree. The cost was not small. The fuel consumption of the Talent Tree was great. However, compared to the time saved, it was nothing. The effect of the new concealment was undoubtedly much stronger than before. Although it might not be comparable to when Spectre activated the ghost pattern, it was not far away. However, concealment always needed to be complemented with aura concealment. Simply concealing one's body was useless. The more powerful a cultivator was, the stronger their spiritual sense would be. If one's body was concealed, one would be easily discovered if one did not conceal their aura. Spectre was undoubtedly proficient in concealment. It was a pity that Lu Yi couldn't pry the breath concealment part of the ghost pattern from her last time. It didn't seem to be a matter of money. Lu Yi was going to try again. If it really didn't work, he could let Spectre inscribe the breath concealment part of the ghost pattern for him to see. It was the same. He didn't have to look at her body. He sent out the message, but there was no response. He didn't know what this woman was doing. After a while, the musical note suddenly vibrated. Lu Yi checked and found that it was indeed Spectre who replied. However, there was no specific information, only a location. Obviously, she wanted him to meet at this location. Lu Yi took out the star map and compared it. After confirming the location, he immediately got up, constructed the spirit pattern and put on the new concealment. He quietly left the cave and rushed out. Tang Jun, who was setting up the formation, seemed to have sensed something. He glanced in the direction Lu Yi had left. On the other side, the woman named Bansi also raised her eyes and looked in the same direction calmly. After leaving the Wushuang Island, Lu Yi took out the star boat and rushed to the rendezvous point. The location Spectre sent was not too close to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Even though Lu Yi hurried there with the help of the star boat, it still took him 2 full days. There was a huge floating continent here, which seemed to be the debris of a collapsed dead star. The whole floating continent was shaped like a big bowl, with a huge pit in the middle. Lu Yi put away his star boat from afar, changed into Fa Wuzuan's appearance and clothes, and hid his body and breath and rushed in that direction. He wasn't worried that Spectre would ambush him here. He didn't have much contact with this woman. He knew she wasn't a good person, but he didn't think she would be so despicable. However, Fa Wuzuan's identity was a sensitive matter, so he still had to be careful. He circled around the floating continent from afar, but he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. He also couldn't find any trace of Spectre. "Where is she?" Lu Yi transmitted. Before long he received Spectre's reply. "Coming." After waiting for a while, he saw a figure rushing in his direction. Who else could it be but Spectre? However, when Lu Yi saw the scene behind Spectre, his eyes couldn't help but twitch. This was because he discovered that Spectre was actually being hunted down by someone. And the person chasing after her was Yu Yao. In an instant, Lu Yi saw through Spectre's intentions. No wonder she would choose this place as the rendezvous point. When he contacted her 2 days ago, she was already being hunted down. This woman was really something. Yu Yao was chasing after her, yet she managed to drag it out until now. However, from the looks of it, she didn't seem to be having a good time either. She was in a very sorry state. The fact that a late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator could last so long under Yu Yao's pursuit was already a testament to her powerful foundation. She had summoned him here either to divert the trouble away or to join forces with him to kill Yu Yao. However, even though Lu Yi had recently advanced to the late-stage Constellation Realm, he knew that he was no match for Yu Yao. This was because the nature of the energy in a Constellation Realm cultivator's body was completely different from that of Yu Yao's. Back then, the three of them had joined forces to fight the Withered Skeleton General. Their opponent was a weakened Yu Yao. Even after forming a formation, they still had to expend a lot of effort to kill her. Now, the one chasing after Spectre was a mid-stage Yu Yao, who was many times stronger than the Withered Skeleton General. How could the two of them possibly defeat her? Lu Yi couldn't even understand how Spectre had managed to last until now. After seeing the situation clearly, Lu Yi immediately took out his star boat and prepared to leave this troublesome place. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.